Dargaville, where this morning on the 16th of February, most of the councillors are gathering in person here. So for the avoidance of doubt, I'm Mayor Jason Smith. We have Deputy Mayor Anna Curnow present, Councillor David Wills, Councillor Jonathan Larson, Councillor Erin Wilson-Collins, and Councillor Peter Webby are all present in the room. Online, we have Councillor Victoria de Lavares-Woodcock, and we, at this point, have two gaps, and that is Councillor Vincent and Councillor Joyce Pucky. So at this point, I'm just going to open this morning's and today's briefing with a karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapu pounamu te moana, hei hoa rahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, araha atu, araha mai tātou I a tātou. So for this morning, we have a very long day ahead, actually, with this very important work for this briefing. So I'm going to hand over at this point to our policy manager, Michael Day, who is going to lead us and introduce to us where we are up to with the district plan review, how much we've achieved so far, and what the immediate next milestones are going to be. Michael.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good morning, elected members. Today, we are going to be talking about the draft provisions for the Historic Heritage Chapter, the Notable Trees Chapter, and the Sites and Areas of Significance to Tangata Whenua Chapter, as well as the Noise Chapter. Let's see, where are we with the slide? Can we go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, as the Mayor has said, there is a lot of material to get through today. So I won't hold you up long this morning. Key objectives are, first and foremost, to get through all the material today. We are looking to provide elected members with a high-level direction. Look, there is a lot of material to get through. We don't necessarily need you, elected members, to go diving down into the detail, but we're more than happy to go there if you want for any topics. Another key outcome today is for you to start to conceptualise how the draft district plan look and feel. So I call it a jigsaw puzzle that's coming together. So far we've had about 6 briefings so far, and we've been bringing you topics along the way, 2 topics here, 3 topics here, and it's a jigsaw puzzle that's coming together, and it's almost come together. The next month, being March, will be the final briefing where we bring our last suite of topics to you in advance of April, when the team will bring the full draft district plan back to you. We also have a whole suite of technical experts available throughout the day to assist with technical questions that you may have on the topics. Next slide, please. Right, so what you see there is essentially what I've just spoken to. This month, we've got the ones I've just outlined just then. Next month, we've got the energy infrastructure and transport topic, as well as the zoning chapters, multi-purpose in particular, designations, and the Tangata Whenua process chapter. As mentioned, draft full plan to you in April, coming to you May council meeting to seek approval to commence public engagement on the draft plan in early June. Any questions to date? Your Worship.
So I have a question, Michael. It's about the Indigenous biodiversity chapter.
Yes, Your Worship.
The word chapter, and the government's policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity. Have you heard anything from them about what their timing is for that work, and very importantly for the people in Kaipara for the SNAs, because that Indigenous biodiversity equals where we talk about SNAs, and there were of course people marching in the streets
Your Worship.
in Far North District about this very chapter. So we try to align it here for Kaipara so that the government has released its policy statement. Have you heard anything on that?
So, firstly, as you can see by the schedule, we are meant to be covering off that topic next month. With regards to your question though, I have heard that the central government have slipped on their time frame here and will not be putting the NPS out prior to us actually putting our draft out. So they have fallen behind on their scheduling and their timetable. So I'd like to have a robust discussion with you next month, if we can, about our process going forward in this space.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we'll hold all of that discussion until next month. Thank you. And it should be clearer by then. There'll be hopefully more information.
That's correct. If that's okay with you.
Yeah. Yep, sure. Thank you. Thanks. Elected members, are there any further matters here regarding what's coming up?
That was the biggie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Michael, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to pass it across to Catherine Overwater and Betty Connolly now to talk through the historic heritage provisions. So Catherine, if you could take over from here.
Good morning, elected members, and I'd just like to quickly introduce Betty. So Betty's come out of retirement to help us here at Kaipara District Council, so for that we're very grateful. So I've worked with Betty for the last 10 years on the Waikato District Plan, and Betty's kindly agreed a few months back to help us, particularly with heritage. It's been her pet topic for many, many years, and she's been involved with heritage at the Waikato regional level and at the Waikato District Council as well. So she's got great wealth of experience in the space, obviously new for Kaipara. So just bear that in mind when you test Betty. And also I'd like to introduce Mcewen, our expert, who's also based down in the Waikato, and Anne, her company is Heritage Consultancy Services. So Anne comes also with a huge wealth of experience and knowledge at a national level, actually, and I'd just like to welcome her and introduce her to the elected members this morning. So I'm going to hand over to Betty. Betty's going to take us through the presentation, and as we go through, Anne's available for any of the sort of technical questions. And obviously Betty's been working on the draft provisions that we've circulated material for already. So I'm just going to hide and let Betty take over. So over to you, Betty.
Good morning, Your Worship, elected members and staff. As Catherine said, yes, I've been working on this for quite a while. So I will just work your way through. As I understand it, you have read all of the documents that have been provided to you. So I'll just give you a very quick overview just to jog your memory, or if you wish me to just carry on to the last few slides, please let me know. But Catherine, if you can just move the PowerPoint along, please. Okay, so basically we as you know, we work under the Resource Management Act. Heritage is a Section 6 matter. 6E and 6F are the parts of Section 6 that have matter to us, and there's also some in Section 7 and under Part 8, which is heritage orders, which you actually have in Kaipara District. Not all councils have these, so it is something that's just that little bit different. Carrying on, we've got, see, I've just lost my page. Catherine, can you flip the page, please?
Sure, Betty.
We've got the Heritage New Zealand Paheretaonga Act 2014, and the purpose of this act is to promote the identification, protection, preservation and conservation of the historical and cultural heritage of New Zealand. They have principles under the Act under Section 4, and many of those principles actually line up with what is under Section 6 in the RMA. They did do a big change to the Act in 2014, and it was to make sure everything was in alignment. Under this Act, archaeological sites, and I do have to stress here, recorded or unrecorded, are afforded protection. So there's a lot of archaeological sites already noted, but even if one is unrecorded and it is found, it is still afforded protection under the Act. Just as a quick overview, and then there's the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement and the Northland Regional Policy Statement. Both of those have objectives and policies under those statements that we have to, or Kaipara has to take into consideration when looking at reviewing the district plan. And that's just the actual higher order documents that we are obliged to work under. So just a quick overview, which you will all be very aware of as well. Historic heritage includes those items that provide a sense of place and tangible links with the past. And that's the easiest way to describe it. It's everybody has a different interpretation, but it is basically what is in the place in your district and the links that it does provide to the past of your district. As you know, Kaipara is steeped in history. It was one of the first areas settled by Maori and also early European, and it's got a wide range of selection of heritage sites. When I actually started working on this, I was quite intrigued to see just exactly how many sites have been registered with Heritage New Zealand, and it's been quite interesting to view those sites. I'm sorry I don't know your district all that well because I haven't been able to get up there, but Catherine and Anne have been keeping me updated as to where everything is. As you will know, there's been no review of heritage for some time with your last district plan, and what is scheduled needs to be reviewed because time marches on, and consideration given to identifying additional items if that's what you wish to do. So just underneath that, which you would have already seen, is a few of the stats for you. Currently you've got 84, and you've got Dr. Mcewen has identified already 2 that she is recommending for scheduling, new ones. There's a whole list that have been provided by either Dr. Mcewen or people within the community that she would like to be reviewed, which is 44. And there's some on the current schedule that Dr. Mcewen considers needs further investigation because she hasn't been able to identify and collate enough information just from being in the Waikato. So they will require site visits and a bit more digging in your area. And also on that list that you've got 3 items that are covenanted by Heritage New Zealand. So that means that they have put covenants on them. They have to enforce those covenants. I don't actually know what those covenants are. I'm not sure whether Dr. Mcewen will, but they are required to enforce those covenants. And in actual fact, the question has to be asked as to whether they get any further protection under the district plan. Both Dr. Mcewen and I don't think they do. We think it should be a Heritage New Zealand role to do that, but Heritage New Zealand, of course, will argue the other way, that they think they get more protection under the district plan. So that's a discussion to be had amongst yourselves as to what you wish to do with these 3 buildings or items. We do not have any input into having those covenants or anything taken off either. They're completely outside our jurisdiction. So they are there, and we just have to actually decide what to do with them, really. So we've I have drafted, along with consultation with Catherine and some other people and Dr. Mcewen, some provisions. I have come up with objectives and policies which you would have all seen.
Sorry, Betty, could I just jump in and ask the elected members if they've got any questions so far?
Yes, definitely.
I think it's a good time to
Councillor
raise
Whitty,
questions.
and then Councillor Curnow, thank you.
Yes, Betty, just looking through the list of buildings that you've put in here that have been listed already, it's interesting that in the east, in Mangawhai area, there has been a number of buildings which I understood had been listed under the Heritage Act, such as the Tara Road School, the old original beach school at Mangawhai was built in 1890, the old original museum, post office. There's a number of them. They've been collected and clustered together beside the museum and the historic village, and yet there's no mention of it in any of your documentation. I'm just wondering why that omission has been overlooked.
Can I pass that over to Dr. Mcewen, please, because she's been doing the investigations into all of those buildings, and she should be able to give you further discussion around that.
Thanks, Betty. Tēnā koutou katoa. The Tara School building, just to take that example, Councillor, if I may, you'll see on the draft schedule document that you've been provided with, I have recorded that building. I think it's on page, oh, the page numbers have gone. It's under the heading buildings that I've recommended to come off the district plan schedule. I think there's a common confusion that arises between buildings that have historic note and importance to communities and those that need to be protected under Section 6 of the RMA. And there are exceptions always, but typically if a building has been relocated, particularly with some of the buildings in your district that have been relocated more than once, typically that means that they have lost the significant heritage value as a historic heritage resource and don't warrant scheduling on the district plan. That doesn't mean to say that they're not important, but in the case of the Tara School building, for example, now that it is on a different site, in my opinion, it has lost that significant historic heritage value that would warrant its scheduling on the district plan to then become subject to the rules and provisions. To give you another example, the Gum Diggers Hut in the Dargaville Museum, for example, that I've also recommended come off the schedule. If that structure stayed on the district plan into the proposed district plan, the museum would have to apply for resource consent to move that building, that structure within the museum setting. And I can't kind of imagine that is what people would wish to happen, even though clearly it's an important museum exhibit, it's an important historic artefact for the district.
You raise an interesting point about the relocation. In a number of areas within the district, there is the risk over a period of time with sea level rise under climate change conditions that some of these buildings may in fact be threatened and may have to be relocated now into an area where they can still be maintained and seen as a significant part of the history of the district. So that what you're suggesting in your definition would mean that they're probably going to lose their heritage status. And I just wonder about that.
As I said, there's always exceptions to that, to the general principle that buildings that have been relocated have lost enough of their heritage value to no longer warrant being scheduled. Clearly, if an item is currently on the district plan, on the operative plan, and it needs to be relocated in the next 12 months, say, because of coastal hazard or some other event, clearly that the owner of that property will have to apply for resource consent. It will be considered under the existing provisions, and then it can, if a consent is granted, it can be removed. So there's no relocation for, as the provisions that Betty's drafted, relocation is absolutely envisaged as one of the possible outcomes for heritage items in the district. It's about managing those outcomes in order to protect the heritage values. Where you have buildings that have been relocated either since the operative plan was notified or before that, in my professional opinion, those buildings and the cases that I've outlined don't merit scheduling as significant historic heritage resources on the district plan. That does not mean that they're not historically important or valued by the community, but this is a resource management process that has a particular focus. And as I say, the Dargaville Museum having to get a resource consent to move the hut, would seem to be a poor, outcome. And in the future, that's why, as Betty's already outlined, every district plan review does start from the beginning, does look at the existing schedule and say, where have we got to? What is the resource that needs to be protected in the new plan? So that's the function of the review process that we're undertaking.
Thank you. So I've got a supplementary question, and then we'll come to Councillor Curnow. So Dr. Mcewen, therefore, if that's so, what protections are there or would there be in the district plan for any of these relocated buildings?
If
Buildings which have been relocated, if you like.
Currently, if buildings are scheduled on the operative plan, then they are subject to the rules in the operative plan, as I'm sure you already know. When we have the situation of having the operative and the proposed plan, you've got both plans being kind of run jointly, and so the proposed plan has immediate legal effect, the provisions for heritage, but that doesn't extinguish the provisions in the operative plan per se. Once the proposed plan is fully implemented, then if the buildings aren't scheduled on the plan, then they aren't protected by the provisions of the district plan. But that doesn't mean to say that, for example, the gum digger's hut is going to be thrown out. And clearly buildings that are within museum preserves, or if they're council owned, if those are council owned properties, if there are reserve management plans in place, there's still going to be opportunities for protection. It's just not going to come through that vehicle of the district plan.
Thank you. So I guess my question was, what are those opportunities for protection if we're trying to preserve and the community imagines that they're being preserved? How can that be referred to in our district plan, that we go, oh, these things are now off the schedule, but they will still be protected by this and this and this and this and this? Are there any of those things?
I think quite often this is where districts, city councils and district councils rely on heritage strategies that articulate the management and the recognition of historic places in terms of signage and interpretation, and also facilitate and foster those relationships with museum entities, for example, where you have the other entities protecting things. In Christchurch, for example, there is a heritage park on the outskirts of Christchurch, not too far from the airport, the Lady Isaac Park, which is kind of the adopted home of quite a few relocated heritage historic buildings. None of them are scheduled on the district plan in Christchurch, but that doesn't mean to say they're not being protected because of their location and because of the care that's gone into moving them and restoring them. So I think district plans are vitally important documents, but they're not the only way that people protect things. And homeowners protect their buildings all the time, obviously, so that they can continue to enjoy the amenity of living in a historic building. That doesn't mean to say they have to be scheduled on the district plan.
Thank you, that's clear. Councillor Curnow, then Councillor de la Barras Woodcock. Screen, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to drill in just a little bit more into, in the schedule, you pass these buildings that have been relocated into a museum environment as a museum exhibit. The Tara School, although it sits alongside a museum, it's not actually part of that museum. It's part of the Historic Village Trust. So does that still count as a museum exhibit? Like, how do we define whether it's a museum exhibit? And then on to the Mayor's point of how, if it's a museum exhibit and it sits outside the district plan, are we responsible for, or should we be responsible for ensuring that the protection continues? There's kind of two questions there.
Okay. I think in general terms, presenting you all with this draft schedule report was absolutely intended to kind of facilitate further information, further refinement of the description of buildings and so on. So thank you very much for your point about the Mcewen Tara School building kind of not being an exhibit, but being associated with the museum. I guess the other thing that I would suggest is that if you've got a trust that has been set up to protect relocated historic buildings from around the district, as is the case at the Mangawhai Museum, then to my mind that raises the strong possibility that there is an entity that is going to be responsible for the protection of those items, that then does not need to be undertaken by the council as well. And so I haven't seen, obviously I haven't got the trust deeds for that particular community trust, but I'm sure it has provisions for the ongoing care and maintenance of those buildings, and there will be a scenario, as there is with all trusts, about what happens when they're wound up and whether or not there is some gift, you know, to the museum or to another entity if the founding trust is set up. So I guess the key thing really is that the district plan has a particular purpose and focus in terms of the Resource Management Act, and I think sometimes people can confuse the situation by thinking the district plan is the only way in which the history and cultural values of a community are recognised and protected. And so that, as I mentioned, that's where heritage strategies often come in order to span the range of heritage activities going on in a district, from the resource management protection kind of end of things, right through to interpretation, signage, heritage festivals, all of those non-regulatory things that actually kind of share the heritage of the, you know, of the district with the community. So if things aren't scheduled, it doesn't mean, of course, that they're all going to be bulldozed tomorrow. And in fact, sometimes in some of the monitoring work I've done around the country, it makes you wonder if things would be better not being scheduled. You know, people, now that this list is out in the world, of course, the new heritage items I've identified, if you were the owner of one of those buildings and felt that you really didn't want it to receive any heritage protection, you'd be, you know, applying for a sort of code of compliance to demolish it tomorrow. So that is one of the risks with heritage. It's not just about what's on the schedule now, it's about how to work through a process and be open about the process, but at the same time know that that risks identifying targets, if you will.
Yeah, does lead me on to my next question, which is what are the impacts of owners and what are their rights of appeal or reply to a potential listing, and how does that process work?
Betty, do you want to take that one?
Okay. What happens is that owners are advised by obviously letter. You once you've decided that this is the list or you want to include these items, owners will be advised. They have the right to come in and give their opinion, and then and staff will listen to that. And you often find that what comes in is, oh yeah, well, you can actually agree with that because we might have some of the information wrong. It might not be as valuable heritage wise as what Dr. Mcewen thinks. So there is always that option. And then after that, a decision has to be made as to whether it is listed. Now, you can list without the owner's approval. You do not need owner's approval to list. So it's just up to you what happens after that. What it actually entails then is that, as you will see, there are the provisions in the plan, and it means if we have tried very hard to make the provisions as permissive as possible. So we aren't here to stop anybody doing anything with their heritage building or house. We've endeavoured very hard to make those, so that they can do a certain amount. But there are some things, of course, once you start adding a wing to a house, a heritage house, it changes the whole character and heritage of that building. So those things have to be reviewed very carefully through a resource consent process. But I mean, that's the extreme. And then you've got things like demolition as well. So, or just moving it around, within its setting. Is it still in the same place? Does it still have its association with the gardens that have all these 1800 roses in it, or is it at the other end of the farm now? So those things are all taken into consideration, sorry.
And there's the appeal process too. If landowners are still aggrieved, then they can take that out as well.
There is a process.
There's a process, yes.
It's not just that.
That's good.
There you go. That's it.
No, there is a process.
Just one final question, if I might, and that is that, is this a process where we build the schedule and that's it, that's the cutoff until we do the next district plan, or is there a process for kind of ongoing modification to the schedule?
It's a straight RMA process. A plan change can be undertaken at any time. Typically, heritage is one that doesn't go through a lot of plan changes. Often heritage lists don't get reviewed until the next review of the plan. But if something really important comes up that or there might be half a dozen buildings that suddenly pop up that should be registered, you as a council then have to make that decision as to whether you put the money into a plan change. You do have to do a full plan change process under the RMA, so it's not cheap.
All right. Yeah, cool. So this is, to all intents and purposes, we need to get it right now. Because it's expensive to do anything later.
That's one of the key benefits of a draft as well, is that it's a statutory process. So we put a draft out. What do you think, community? And then potentially amend things prior to notification as well.
Yeah. So once the plan is done, then that's the schedule. Whatever's on is on. Whatever's not on is not on until the next round.
And
unless you do it.
Through the submission process, you will get people that suddenly come and say, oh, there's a house 5 doors down from me that should be reviewed, and that's what comes out in the submission process and goes through that process to look at it.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my first question is refers to the new item on page 29, the former Northern Wairoa Hospital. And my question is, if this item proceeds through the district plan process and gets a heritage order, does that enable the owner to apply for funding for restoration purposes? Is it an advantage in that regard?
Yes, thank you, councillor. It's one of the ways, separate from Heritage New Zealand listing, it is one of the ways in which a property owner can establish the significant heritage value of their property in order then to use that status for a heritage funding. We unfortunately, and I blame COVID for this amongst lots of other things, unfortunately the government suspended the Heritage Equip Fund last year, which was one of the kind of grand sort of really valuable heritage incentive funds that have been set up in the last couple of years, which enabled, particularly in provincial New Zealand, enabled property owners to apply for money for seismic upgrading, both to get the professional technical inputs they needed and to do the work itself. And it was up to sort of $500,000 for the work. So that fund is currently suspended, and I do hope that there's a lot of lobbying going on about it being reinstated. The environment, the lotteries environment fund and heritage fund is another good source. But also I think oftentimes community trusts, you know, there are lots of kind of opportunities for heritage funding. And yes, I believe that if you have a building that is scheduled, that gives you the opportunity to use that. And also the research and documentation that I've been preparing, that gives you the starting point for a really good application. And I've assisted owners in the past applying for Heritage Equip funding. And I think that the research process, the assessment process is actually one of the ways that the council can demonstrate that it is supporting property owners in terms of attracting that funding for an upgrade. I would just note with the Northern Wairoa Hospital, I'm glad you mentioned that particular building, is that I'm yet to, because of COVID, I'm yet to do the field work I need to do for this project. And so I haven't narrowed down the particular buildings that on that site that I would be recommending for assessment. But I don't have any doubts in my mind at this point that the Northern Wairoa Hospital is a significant historic kind of landmark in the district, and that it does merit that investigation. So, but I do need to narrow down in terms of the field work. The other thing, if I might, I could just mention very briefly about that one. That's a good example of one of the other key things that we're doing at the moment is identifying the settings of heritage items. Because where you have a historic building located on a very large property, I think sometimes people think, well, I'm not going to be able to re-fence my paddock because I've got a 15-hectare property on which there is a historic heritage resource, the farmhouse, but you people are going to come and tell me that I can't do any fencing now. And what I'm doing when I look at historic heritage items on large properties is to look at the setting, and for farmhouses, typically that setting is confined to the garden area. It wouldn't take in the outbuildings. It certainly wouldn't be taking in 3 paddocks away from the house. And so I think that that's one of the things about providing more detail in the assessments is that, as Betty said, sometimes when the owners of new heritage items come in and meet and talk about what this means, the implications of being scheduled, sometimes it's simply a matter of saying, no, I don't, there won't be any heritage provisions covering your paddocks. This is about managing the historic heritage values of this particular building, and therefore trying to protect its values for the community and the district. It's not about coming in every week to check that you've either folded the toilet paper into little triangles or that you are only planting maize in paddock X. So I think that's what's happening with this generation of district plan reviews, is a lot more specific detail to try and give property owners as much clarity as possible, both for rules, from a rules perspective, but also to help facilitate those funding applications, because all buildings cost money to keep up, and the public interest in private owners keeping their heritage buildings in good stock is definitely something that I think I'm very mindful of. And also a lot of districts, some of the districts I work with around the country, if a building is scheduled, they then have a heritage fund that only the scheduled building owners are eligible to apply for. So that's another way that, and that can go to roofing, weather tightness, those kind of issues. So that's where the district plan becomes the sort of focus for something that can have other outcomes, other opportunities for owners and the council in that partnership.
Thank you, Doctor. Another question. So with the new RM urban, the national policy statement on in urban development, with the rule that you could put 3 houses in the in an urban zone on one section, the implications are for a character area like Dargaville, which has, as the Mayor has repeatedly said, the largest number of villas of any town in New Zealand. Is this an issue?
Councillor Belvaris Woodcock, sorry. Those new provisions apply to tier 1 and 2 councils only in the country, of which Kaipara is not one.
Okay, good. Okay, drop that one. What about, a specific question, the post office with the clock tower on the corner of Hokianga and Jervois Road, is it? I was wondering why that isn't in this schedule.
It is.
It is.
It is.
I couldn't see it. Okay.
It's one of the it's one of those buildings that has a heritage covenant on it. So that we've identified that we've got a double up. So the protection being afforded that building is through a heritage covenant, and they typically are more stringent and more restrictive than district plan provisions. And so my recommendation at this point is not to schedule that building. In Nelson, for example, they have a list of buildings in their operative plan that essentially is, these buildings have covenants. The covenant is the vehicle for protection, but we're just telling you that we haven't overlooked them. So that, because if you looked at a schedule and the post office wasn't there, I could understand that people would be going, hang on a minute, that's one of our kind of icon heritage buildings. But because it has a covenant, my recommendation is that it's not scheduled.
So then my question is, like, the building beside it, I think it's a telecom or telecommunications building of like 3 stories. How can this heritage chapter in the future shape to enable or to incentivize and have an outcome of buildings that complement a scheduled item? So the ugliness of the modernist architecture of that telecom building sort of detracts so badly visually from the historic value and amenity of the post office building. And I was wondering if we remove this item from the DP because it's covenanted, is that, yeah, how can we, and so it's a broader question, you know, like in the main street of Dargaville, there's the rotunda, and you know there used to be more of an historic feel to the shop frontages, and then when new builds have happened, like after a fire, it seems that they've lost any sense of architectural continuity that maintains that sense of history. So I guess I'm asking, how is it that we can, without putting too many restrictive provisions on owners, encourage in keeping architecture and development?
There's a couple of things there. One is that as you've alluded to, the protection for a heritage item is limited to that property, because that is the scheduled item. And this kind of relates to the MPS for UD as well, is that one of the things that this project is doing, and that I'm doing, is keeping an eye out for heritage areas. There's one historic area in the schedule at the moment, which is a cluster of houses on River Road. But there are no others. So one of the things that we're trying to do to kind of future-proof the district plan heritage schedule is to look for, make sure if there are heritage areas in the district, they need to be picked up now, because we don't know what the planning framework is going to look like even a year from now. The other thing is, this is where heritage and character kind of interface, and Betty and I have had a lot of experience kind of talking through these issues of how do you create an environment in which the character of buildings that aren't scheduled kind of uplifts the scheduled items, or at least doesn't drag them down. And so there's two parts to that. One is the provisions for a town centre. So it's about planning provisions for the centre of Dargaville. How might they, at the very least, not encourage unsympathetic development? So if, for example, you said you wanted every building in the town centre to be 10 stories high from now on, I would suggest that would have a negative impact potentially on the heritage buildings and the character of the town centre. And the other thing is that that's where you get into processes I'm sure you've already undertaken in terms of structure planning and community planning, both in Dargaville but in other centres around the district, getting the community to say, what is it that you want to protect, to incentivise, and then looking at things like design guides. So there are a lot of examples around the country now that I know Betty is looking at, where councils have thought through a kind of hierarchy of protection and management that goes from individually scheduled buildings through into character areas, which might be residential or town centre, and then into those kind of broader kind of community planning exercises that you might have already, I'm trying to think if it's one that you've already done for, is it Mangaturutu, or, there's other, some of the smaller centres around the district where you've gone through those exercises. And I guess one of the things we're trying to do is be very mindful of where those documents exist in order to make sure that this new plan does the best it can to reflect those values and the desire of people to kind of keep the character without ruling out new build, new commercial opportunities and so on.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mcewen. Thank you, Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock. We've got 10 minutes left for this item. We're going to go now to Councillor Vincent. So remaining question, Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock, you may want to put in writing, thank you, because we're also needing to get to the direction that the officers are seeking from us. So Councillor Vincent, question quickly, and then Councillor Wilson-Collins after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, kia ora everybody. My apologies for lateness in appearing. Technology defeated me. However, I'm here now. I suppose, so I missed the first part of the discussion, and I'm not sure if the meeting did discuss confirm its intention or change its intention to to proceed as expeditiously as possible in getting ourselves to a proposed plan before the end of the year, or not.
So, Councillor Vincent, yes, we did, and yes, we did, and yes, we did. And
Okay.
we're planning to be having, just to recap on that, we're planning to be having the full draft of the full district plan at the April council briefing for the district plan, and then for the May council meeting, a decision for it to go out to public engagement in May.
Right,
Thank
jolly
you.
good. Okay, now, so my question then follows in regard to this issue of historic heritage, which I find a bit of a redundant statement, but that I just thought it's heritage. However, by the way, can you tell me what has happened with regard to our historic heritage in the district since the current plan became operative?
I did check with monitoring, your monitoring team, and they said that they had no consents or anything, but I will confess that we haven't followed that up completely. I can get somebody within the team to do so.
Yeah, time's tight. Because my question is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Because if there isn't a problem, why do we need to make life more complicated and spend more money on, dare I say it, in their presence, consultants, to solve this problem for us, which we don't actually have?
That's an interesting values-based question. Thank you, Councillor Vincent. We might just park that question, okay, regarding, because again, the justification for the need, you may have missed it at the top of this item, but the justification for the need for us to get a clear chapter here was outlined at the top of this item. Thank you. All right.
Okay, well, I missed that, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Carry on.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, Anne and Catherine and Betty. I just have a couple of questions. I'm here, but I'm just going to point my face at the microphone so you can hopefully hear me better. So my questions related to the Northern Wairua Hospital, which I think you've already covered, Anne, and as that it was duplicated in your report. So I assume that's because you're still trying to ascertain which buildings will actually be included. Is that correct?
Yes, the copy that you have of my draft schedule has been further refined since we needed to get a copy to support this meeting. So it's only, the building is now only mentioned in one place in the report as a potential item.
Perfect, awesome, thank you. And then the other question that I had in regards, we've touched on it slightly, in regards to the Dargaville Main Street area, just because I don't have a full understanding of how you select the building. So I'd just like to have a bit more of an understanding of we've got pubs, but we don't seem to have anything else from the main street. And I just understand that there are a number of older buildings there, but is that not covered by this sort of work, or how does that fit in with preserving the heritage of Main Street?
Through you, Your Worship, just to help Anne out here with that, we engaged Anne to mostly look at the existing scheduled buildings in the district plan. And as she's been doing that work and looking across things, there's been a few additions, obviously, to that. But I just want to make the point that we're not doing a district-wide survey here because it's a cost issue for council. And so Anne was engaged mostly to look at the existing schedule and review those. And as she comes across other things, we've been talking about adding those. We are going to take the approach that when we release the draft district plan to the public, that if there are other buildings or heritage items that need to be reviewed, we'll look at those. And as you can see from the numbers that Betty presented already, we've found 44 new ones that could potentially go on the list. And that's not to say they're all going to arrive there, but I think we just need to take a bit of a conservative approach. We don't have the budget to review the whole district. So we are looking at just ones as they come up, but hopefully appealing to the public might give us a list of more. And obviously it's a cost thing for us to get in to review each and every single one of those. So I just wanted to make that point. And Anne, if you've got anything to add to that, then feel free.
Thank you. So I did identify the Williams Ball and Fannin building on Victoria Street in Dargaville. And I've had a look at thanks to Google, I have looked at the rest of the main street. One of the difficulties is that because we're talking about it, and it's the RMA that uses this stupid historic heritage phrase, there has to be a degree of authenticity and integrity about items. So where you've got a high level of modification, even if a building is the place that 3 generations of your family have been shopping for long trousers, that really mean the building itself is going to make the grade for scheduling. So it does, and that's where, as I say, with town centres, that's where we start talking character in terms of height, the provision of suspended verandas, things like that can kind of maintain the character that is there now, without overinflating the values of buildings and saying, well, we have to schedule them because we need to, you know, we want to sort of put some pegs along the street to kind of hold the line. Every single building has to meet the criteria for assessment to be scheduled.
Perfect. Thank you both. That makes it much more clearer for my mind of how this all works. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got 7 minutes left for what has been allocated for this item. Michael, I note on slide number 12 of the presentation, you're seeking direction from the elected members here. Sure. Okay, including, I'd say, the third point down. Are there any concerns with the provisions as drafted? I'd like to pick up on one of the things that's very much been in this room this morning, which is, I would say that there is a concern among elected members about buildings which have been relocated, which still have architectural merit. They may have been constructed locally, made of kauri, they may have all sorts of historical relevance, but they've been moved from their place. One of the things about these old wooden buildings here in the north is that they get moved a lot. I mean, Aratapu as a town was completely moved and moved away. Some of the buildings that are on this schedule were moved from Aratapu. If a building has been moved at all, is it null and void as far as our district plan is concerned? Because if that is the lens, then I'd say we have real problems with the proposed scheduled list, if that is the lens. So I'm saying we need a provision here to also capture the buildings that have been relocated. They may be considered in a purist sense as dislocated artifacts, right? But nevertheless, we need to be able to capture them somehow in this document so that your Mangawhai historic village with all its cluster of old buildings that have been saved for their architectural merit but are completely displaced is still of note in the district plan, and how we capture that. It's a different level because it may not be kind of RMA kind of level, but nevertheless that there is something there because these buildings are known to us. Like I say, the one of the buildings you've got in here, the Mcewen store, has been moved 3 times, yeah, to its current site, which is written in this list as being 1890. Yeah, the church at Naumai, beside the marae, was dragged from Aratapu across the river. Yeah, so and which is to Councillor Wethy's point regarding climate change in the future and so on. Remembering that there were no buildings that were really, really low to the ground because it was all a swamp right across Kaipara. So the point I'm making, and I'm just seeking from elected members, I'm seeing nods here. How can we get a basket, a kete, into which to put all of those dislocated buildings or those that have been moved, which may not be in the purest sense historic places, but they're certainly still historic buildings, yeah? So just like you to probably consider that, but I'm seeing nods here. Right, are there any further bits of direction? Councillor Wills.
But can I ask the experts, just on that previous comment, but the direction of this is within the rules that we've been given, which the lady explained, do not include relocated buildings. So this is, district plan is not the place for those buildings to be put and protected. But that's what was, can I just ask for confirmation that, is that what I understood, what I heard?
There are rules, Councillor Wills, but anyway.
I'm not challenging you, I'm just asking.
Yeah.
So it was very specific on that question. What my question was, which, and I did have a question, but was modification, and when you make a decision on whether or not that limits its heritage value, please.
So the review process is using the criteria, assessment criteria that are derived from the RMA, kind of the definition of historic heritage resources. So every item on the district plan needs to meet the criteria as a significant heritage resource, essentially. And if it doesn't meet the criteria because it lacks authenticity, integrity, we've had a nomination come in yesterday for the Hakaru dairy factory, for example, which looks to be in a fairly parlous condition. So the question is, do the criteria, the application of the criteria need to consider authenticity and integrity? And then that would make the determination. That's then my recommendation as to whether things are scheduled or not.
And my next one more question on that similar topic. You've also mentioned a number of properties that you haven't been able to get close to. Considering quite a number of them are private residences, if the owners choose not to allow you access, will you still form that opinion off your Google research?
The buildings that are kind of problems at the moment because they are down long drives and they can't be seen from the public domain, they're the ones that are already on the schedule. But I wouldn't be able to, in good faith, recommend that they stay on the schedule if I haven't been able to see them. So my recommendation would then be to remove those. But they're buildings that are on the operative plan now. So one would hazard a guess that either the owners are fine with being on the district plan and therefore don't mind me driving up the drive, or if they want to come off the district plan, then the way to do that would be to deny me access, in which case I can't recommend to you that the building is scheduled.
Thank you.
Thank you. So elected members, further direction, please. In the closing minutes here, Councillor Larson and Councillor Curnow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thanks everyone present for your presentations. I just want to come back to the point that Councillor Vincent was kind of raising before in terms of our overall direction with the process, and that my very clear understanding when we started out this fast tracking process was that we were primarily trying to get land in particular parts of the district, be it residential, commercial and industrial, rezoned quickly because there was a real lag in having that available. And the second thing we were trying to achieve at the same time was to fix up any areas of the district plan that weren't functioning and were causing problems. And so the matter that arose in Councillor Vincent's query was, well, what is the problem, the actual problem that's been happening under the current operative district plan that we're trying to fix here? And I don't know that we had an answer to that, and I'm not asking for one now, but I just think in general, with all of these topics, what I would like to see is a bit more reference to the operative district plan in terms of, here is the operative district plan, these are what the rules say. Now, we have a specific issue that's arising, and this is what the issue is, and here's the evidence of it, and then this is what we're proposing to change. Because at the moment, what I'm trying to see through this whole process is something very different to what I envisaged, which was a total bottom-up rewrite of everything, whereas I didn't envisage that that's what we were doing. So it's a bit of a general statement, but just want to flag that that's the experience that I'm having at the moment. Thank you.
Excuse me, Your Worship, could I just jump in here for a moment, please?
Yes, Betty, please.
In regards to going forward, yes, you can roll those ones that schedule's over, but you can be challenged from the time that goes out by anybody who is going to come in and say, what are you basing this registration on? Because I haven't been able to find, and I think your staff are finding it hard to get the information from the old district plan. So if somebody came in about one of those particular buildings and wanted to know why that has been assessed as a Category A building, your staff will find it very hard to be able to respond to them and say that that's why you need these assessments that Dr. Mcewen is providing to you. So that, I think, probably will answer one of your questions. It probably doesn't answer the question about whether you should be going outside what is already on the district plan, but it probably answers, you know, the way forward for what you've got.
So Betty, it's Michael here. I'll just jump in very quickly because I'm conscious of time. We are doing a full district plan review, which is what we're doing here, which is why we're bringing the topics to you in chunks of every single topic of the new plan. But very importantly, prior to notification, we have to do a Section 32 evaluation report for every single topic here, which essentially justifies why our suite of provisions are the most efficient and effective policies, rules, objectives going forward. And we have to test all our proposed provisions against the operative provisions as well to demonstrate and justify why our proposed package is the most efficient and is the most efficient going forward. That work is ongoing and it's iterative. So it's just a very quick.
Thank you. Michael, I've also got a question. The legislation changes with the Historic Places Trust Puhere Taonga Act 2014 came after the last district plan review?
That's correct, Your Worship. So there's a whole heap of national policy direction and regional policy direction that our operative district plan does not give effect to. A whole heap of stuff.
So if you like, that in and of itself
Absolutely.
has this work to be done?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So when people are asking what's changed, if you just say, well, the law's changed, that's a start for us there. Councillor Larson, then I've got two hands further on the screen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't necessarily disagree with the more robust approach that's been taken with this particular topic. However, as elected members, when we're signing off on a draft, I think that we still need to be able to see the justification for the proposed changes that are being made, rather than saying the justification for that will come in the subsequent Section 32 analysis, in that we must know why we're making those changes in our draft now, and I'd like to more clearly hear that as we go along, rather than being told it'll be in our Section 32 analysis.
We'll take it on board.
Plan. Can you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely, we'll take it on board. And we're also cognizant of the direction for a plan, a new plan that is as simple and enabling as possible. And I personally hope that when you see the full draft plan come to you in April, then that jigsaw puzzle will have come together, and hopefully you'll see how it looks and feels, and you can get a real good understanding of it.
Yeah, that's great. My reservation is that it's coming at us very fast, and it's very difficult to change direction if we don't find ourselves satisfied with this given time frames that we've got. So I'm trying to achieve that satisfaction as we go along, rather than get a final document and go, well, actually, it doesn't fit at all. How do we fix it now? We've got no time left, and get railroaded into something that we're not happy with. So it's where I'm coming from.
Look, I've been involved in a whole lot of plan changes and full plan reviews in my career to date, and it's not uncommon for plans to change significantly in between the draft stage and the notification stage. You get feedback from all sectors of the community, from professional bodies, further elected member feedback from fellow councils, and you amend and you revise, and then you put forward the final proposal. So,
I guess.
lots of water under the bridge to come still.
Well, I'm just glad we're having a draft go out.
Absolutely.
Actually,
That's good.
The best part of
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Curnow.
I just, very, very quick, my feedback on the direction sort is, yes, I'm reasonably comfortable with the draft provisions, although I don't know an awful lot about this area, so hard to be certain. Yes to the additional buildings being put in, given that there's a process for people to provide feedback. I don't know that I have any concerns to the provisions because, again, yeah, not an expert here. I think another theme that came up is that are there heritage areas that we ought to be looking at, and is that something we still need to think about? And then something for another time, another meeting, perhaps Mr. Maris might note this is a discussion on a Kaipara Heritage Fund, which will be an LTP matter for the next LTP, but I think there is value in looking at that again. I know we used to have one. I remember the last grant ever made for it was for the Church of Zion down at the bottom of Rogan's Hill. Is that what it's called? Yeah. And to re-roof, I don't believe the re-roofing ever happened though, so I'm not quite sure what happened to that grant. So I'd like to just understand more about that at a later time. That's my feedback.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Oh, do I get in ahead of the people on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just quickly trying to type out what I was going to say. So, so my feedback, yeah, I'll try and be brief as well. I just want to concur with what Councillor Curnow was talking about with needing to do some more work outside of this and protecting our heritage areas, etc. I think there's more work that we need to do to actually get the job done than what the tools of the district plan are providing. I think this is a great piece of work. I've actually thoroughly enjoyed reading this agenda and going through all the recommendations. Yeah, please email me and tell me how I can have your job. Sounds great. And just to and I completely understand now after the discussions why the recommendations have been made, and I support those. And just Michael, just in addition to what Councillor Larson has been saying, our operative district plan I know is online. Perhaps you could just give us a link to the relevant chapter when you send us the new details maybe, and then we can just go and read the existing chapter, which we could do anyway, but obviously some of us haven't managed to find that.
Sure.
And then we could compare that with what we're being given. Yeah. Thank you. Just to try and solve that problem. Thank you. Done.
Thank you, Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock.
My feedback is to enforce the provision to enforce place and setting being linked to the schedule and to heritage designation, because it's, in my mind, place is indisputably connected to history. And if in the case, for example, of the Tara Road School that's now been relocated to the Mangawhai Community Park, it has lost its place, it's lost its history. It's now just an artifact. And I would hate to see those buildings get the highly subscribed Heritage Equip Fund that has been cancelled due to COVID. But if it is reinstated, and it bloody well ought to be, that we need to use that money to maintain buildings that are still in the right place, still in the place where their history belongs. And so, yeah, that's my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Someone's got to be the party pooper. I think that with the program that we're on, we've got to focus on, like, the main thing is the main thing. And to be blunt, while I do respect our heritage, that is not the main thing in terms of our district plan program. And I would be looking more for a reactive response rather than a proactive approach. And so that we allow for the possibility through the draft plan and the formal submissions process to the proposed plan, the opportunity for people to add buildings or put them forward for consideration to be included in the schedule as we set out the potential incentives to encourage people to do that. And like I'd be keen on a promotion and educational approach, quite apart from any rules-based approach. And it is obvious that there are a lot of people who live in these old buildings, like particularly residential dwellings, which are well cared for, and they're a tribute to them for them caring for them. That's something that could be spoilt by a layer of regulatory control coming over top of that. So I would be keen to take a light-handed approach with this topic and look for ways of incentivizing how people will cherish and value and look after these buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wethy.
Yeah, just a little bit of feedback, and I guess I'm still concentrating on the fact that I think the district plan should recognise, I've just asked for consideration, where there have been significant historic buildings in our district that have been uplifted and relocated, whether it be by a trust or other interested parties associated with museums or whatever, and they're being maintained and they're being available for public to visit and understand the history. I think that should be something that we do have in our plan, whether it's a listing or not, but it should be there. And the Mangawhai Historic Village is just one example of that, where they've collected not just the Tara School that's been mentioned. There's a whole other cluster of buildings which have been put there. They're being maintained. They're going to be available, or they are available for public viewing, and they've got huge significance to that part of the district. So, and there will be others similarly situated throughout the whole of the Kaipara. So I think we should recognise that some way in this this chapter of the district plan. Whether it's a listing or not, that's a matter for you to consider and decide and give us your best recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, is that sufficient direction for you?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to pick up Councillor Curno's note here around heritage areas or historic areas that have been mentioned. And I guess, is there an opportunity for elected members to provide further feedback in this space as this is proceeding?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. So are we at the end of this item for now? Yes, we are. Okay. Look, thank you, Betty, and thank you, Dr. Mcewen, for joining us and for your input this morning. This is very interesting work. Thank you. We'll move on to our next item. Just in a second, do people, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. Do people need a 2-minute break?
Go for the.
No, we'll proceed. We'll keep going. Notable trees. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Notable trees, Michael. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. Betty, this is your topic as well, with support from Arbor Lab technical experts. So I'll leave you to carry on, okay?
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I get all the exciting ones, as you can see. So, notable trees again is under the RMA, section 7, and you will be aware of that. I've already quoted that in the report. It is also subject to part 8 of the heritage order, of which you've got the Moreton Bay fig tree at Pahi, which is a beautiful tree, I do have to say, and is on the front of this this presentation.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, can I ask a question, Betty? I know you're just about to start, but it'll help because I'm sure you'll explain it, please. Sorry to interrupt you so quickly. I went through the list and nearly every one of them, or every one of them, is an imported tree. And I went through other district regional plans and had a look, and they had a greater variety of native trees identified. Is that, I don't want to get into a Maori versus colonist discussion, but it's just a question I'm asking at this point, please.
It would have just been that those were the only trees. They may have just come through from the old operative plan, and they were the only ones that were presented at that time for, you know, for the old plan. But definitely your two arborists that are working, the arborists that are working at Carl and John, are both identifying and looking at other trees. It's not just restricted to imported trees. If we can get native trees on there, that's good. It's just that they haven't been addressed as yet. Does that answer you? Unless you want Carl to, who's sitting there, he can perhaps add some more for you.
It's just a comment. I mean, it's a question wrapped in a comment that they're all our notable trees in this district are imported trees.
All of them.
Well, nearly all of them. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I just compared that to other districts, and I wondered why so that's the operative. So I'm looking to.
Thank you.
Proposal of things.
Yeah, Councillor Wilson.
I don't know what was in the how they identified them in the operative. Sorry. But it will be tried to be addressed in the proposed again if you wish us to find other trees. That's one of the directions. So again, we've got the Heritage New Zealand Pahu Tower Act 2014, and you've also got the Regional Policy Statement, and which gives you provisions. And under here trees, it is also important, and I know this is perhaps a little bit out there, but Heritage New Zealand looks at subdivision use and development. So when there's anything, especially with a tree, to do with subdivision, that, you know, has to be looked at as well. So if we can just quickly...
Excuse me, Betty, I'll just pause there. Michael, question, the regional policy statement that's been referred to, is that the heritage policy statement, or is there a regional policy statement on notable trees?
No, there's not. So the regional policy statement for Northland has a policy or two on heritage in general. So that's what Betty's referring to as that.
Okay.
In the RPS.
Thank you. And again, that regional, the RPS.
Operative 2016.
Was 2016, so it was after our district plan was established. Thank you. Just making that clear. Okay, thanks.
Right.
Thank you, Betty. Please proceed.
Okay, so in the interest of time, seeing as we've had quite a robust discussion and we need to move on, I'm taking it that you have read the overview. As I said, your Moreton Bay fig tree is subject to a heritage order. And so if we go to keep going through the PowerPoint, Catherine, I've gone to objectives, policies, and you've all had a chance to look at those. And you will see that we have included rules about power lines. Now that is because there's been new legislation in over time, and that legislation will often override our rules as well. And we are allowing for unsafe trees, because trees, of course, are subject to storms, as has happened in the last week. And we have to be able to address that, because it's a bit late to try and go for resource consent when the tree has actually been blown down or half down and you've got to get it down for safety. So we have looked at provisions for that. The main thing probably in the STEM evaluation is the fact that the operative plan had 150 score points And Carl or John will be able to advise you how all that works, but it is in all that report that they had. And they are proposing that the recommended threshold for this going forward is 130. So if you've got any questions on that, I will pass those to John. Again, same thing, we will go out with letters, you know, to people. Hopefully, we are looking for direction on looking at a few more trees, exactly to cover the point just made from the councillor about the lack of native trees, and feedback from open days. And I guess the other thing that I have that is in here that I have put in, which I didn't actually say before, but you will be all aware of, is that trees and heritage that are council owned are subject to the same provisions as normal landowners. So you'll all be aware of that, but it's just something that sometimes gets lost in the movement of things. So I'm not quite sure if there's any, basically we got some direction. I've put the questions there, and more importantly about the carryover of the trees in the operative to the new ones. And I'm aware that there is some comments about, or some issues around the trees at Pahi. And I don't know whether you wish to bring this up with, you know, in your discussion now, but that is the one that actually has got its assessment sheet in that report for you. Apologies from John and I, we actually had the wrong number against that in that page. It's actually 204, not 192, but the assessment sheet shows the 204. So I'll leave it to get some direction, unless Catherine or Michael have anything that they want to say.
Just a very quick note to me, and it's on the stem cell number. So our current district plan has a stem cell number of 150, which is basically the cut-off point for whether a tree is notable or not, whether it's in the plan or not. Now, that is one of the higher stem cell numbers across the country. So there's a range of numbers across the country from circa 100 in some councils through to 160 in other councils. Our technical arborists are suggesting that our stem cell number for the new plan could go down to 130, but I'll leave it to them to explain their thinking and their rationale, because I'm sure our elected members have some views on that they want to discuss. So that's just a segue for them to talk about that if you would like, elected members.
Thank you. I think some clarity on this point would be good.
Thank you.
Yep. So I assume that's John going to lead this.
John or Carl?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, no, the 150, although, you know, the existing trees score really well, 150 is quite a high score. And generally across the board, you know, most councils are going towards the 130 to 120 scoring, which I believe that includes a few more trees rather than a cutoff. You have quite a lot of trees, mature trees around the district that probably will score around 110 to 120, but we'll probably want to just a little bit more than that and get the best one. So that's why I've sort of nominated 130.
Thank you.
Does everybody understand how the scoring works?
It's in the report.
It is in the report. So, I mean, I'm seeing nods around the table. So, yeah. So we're understanding that. So if you like, the higher the number, the more, I'm going to say, the higher the bar is that you have to get to be a notable tree on your list. Yeah, and the lower the number, arguably the more trees there will be found. Yeah?
Yeah.
It's clear from that sense. Thank you. And Councillor De La Varas Woodcock, is your question in this space? Thank you.
I'm ready to give my feedback on this item, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. That's clear. Hey, just before you do, Michael, are we ready for directions on this item?
I am.
Sorry, and/or elected members, are there any questions before we get to direction?
I have a question that will then help me out.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor De La Varas Woodcock, we'll just hold on your direction just for a moment. We've just got a further question here. Councillor Kerno.
Just looking at this schedule, it's quite west focused in our district, and I'm just wondering whether that's because there are no notable trees kind of east of Paparoa really, or whether we just haven't done that work yet. Because in Mangawhai, there are two particular areas in the middle of the Mangawhai Community Park. There is a tree that is described as the great Pohutakawa in the middle of the park that is kind of the centre, the heart of the park. And then also I was doing a walk around the foreshore around actually a new subdivision that this council, when we first got elected, did the development agreement on, which was all about protecting the Pohutakawas on that foreshore. And those are spectacular trees. They are enormous ancient Pohutakawas that hold that shore together, and really quite spectacular. So I just wondered, have we just not gone there yet, or is it because the STEM scoring is too high, so spectacular as those trees may be, they're not unique? So I'm just wondering, is there a reason, and yeah, where are we with that?
Colleague has just messaged me to say that the trees on the operative district plan were publicly nominated. So I have no idea. I wasn't here. I don't know the background, so I can't answer more than that. But supposedly the public put forward those trees back in the day, circa 2009.
Yeah.
The current district plan was proposed, and then council went through a process. Council would have had its own arborist experts, and the stem cell of 150 would have been decided upon, and hence those trees in there now are those trees which got put forward.
So what are we suggesting now, that we take quite a different approach where we actually go and seek these trees and then tell the community we're wanting to put these trees in the operative plan? Can you tell us why we should?
In your hands, Deputy Mayor. So if the direction from council is for staff to do that, we can do that. If your direction is to not go and seek out trees, then no, we won't. It's up to you here.
Okay, thank you.
I need to think about that.
So we're still on questions, or we're heading on to direction? Because if it's direction, we'll hold. Yeah. So questions. Is this a question, Councillor Wethy?
Yeah, my question is, and just as that comment you made, Michael, about the trees in the operative plan are being nominated by the community. Now, I like Councillor Wills, was quite intrigued by the fact that there were a predominance of exotic trees in the current ones. Now, certainly within the eastern seaboard area, we have got some very significant trees, like by the Tenakaha track, a puri tree, 300 plus years old, and things like that, which are in the area that we hopefully are going to have some protection of in the district plan there. Now, my query would be, have you considered going to the likes of Dr. Gordon Hoskins, who's ex-Forestry Research Institute, chairman of the Mangawhai walking tracks, and a huge expert who's done the ecological reports for the Mangawhai Community Park, etc., etc. He's got a significant understanding and knowledge of the trees in certainly the whole of the Kaiwaka Mangawhai ward in particular. Now, if you tap into some of the expert local community knowledge, it would not only make it a lot more cost effective. I'm just throwing that up as a suggestion. Is that something that you'd consider and asking what trees, giving him the scoring scale and all the rest of it, he can run through and come up with some that we haven't considered up until now.
I'm sure council would love Dr. Hoskins to give us feedback at the draft stage. It would have been great if Dr. Hoskins gave us some feedback at the discussion document stage last year, but yes, certainly if local experts are willing to engage with us, then love it.
So how do you want that to be, canvassed? Do you want to make contact with him yourself? Would you like me to ring him up and get him to contact someone in particular, or what?
If you pass me his details, Councillor Wethy, I can work with the team on that if you like.
Okay, will do.
Thank you. So we're still on questions. Councillor Wills?
Just, it's identifying individual trees. There's some questions being asked about groups of trees like Purakawa. My understanding is outside the district plan, there's other regulations specifically for things like Purakawas on coastlines and that protect them. Is that correct? Or do those need to be brought into the district plan?
Through you, Your Worship, there was some provisions in the Act that actually allowed blanket protection, then that got taken away. So we're now in a position where we have to identify those groups of trees. So we would have to do some spatial mapping to work out, which groups of trees we're going to protect. You have to be specific in the district plan. We can't just do blanket protection. If I'm right, Carl, from our previous discussion, I think urban environments have a slightly different approach to that, and they can do some blanket protection, but we wouldn't be allowed to do that.
Can I also add in here that there is a sense in a lot of communities that all native trees are automatically protected. That's not correct. There is a Native Trees Act. I can't remember what, it's something back in the 1990s, I think, but it only protects native trees on public land and dockland, from my recollection of it. Doesn't protect native trees on private land. And it's more about milling than that as well.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you. So are there further questions? Councillor Vincent, is yours a question or is it a statement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I have a question and I'll leave my statement for later. So the question is similar as for the historic heritage. We're dealing with an aspect of natural heritage here. What is the problem that we're trying to fix here? Now, I realise that if there's a tree that's not on the list and it gets cut down, even though it's a very presentable tree, well, it's not going to show up as a problem in terms of council complaints or service requests or whatever. So I guess it would have to be an anecdotal thing. But do you have a sense of us losing a lot of our highly esteemed trees? Well, it would be highly esteemed trees. That's my question.
Who are you asking, Councillor Vincent?
Yeah.
Say again?
Who are you asking? Are you asking the technical experts or the elected members?
Yes.
What are you asking?
I'm asking the technical experts, do they have a sense that we have a problem with losing these trees which are not on the notable list but could or should be?
Well, first we've got to identify where the really good trees are. With all the pressures that are coming on through building and construction and everything like that now, there's a lot of trees, like especially in Auckland, huge amount of trees getting removed that aren't on a protected list. So this is the best way to ensure that these trees are kept.
I mean, simply put, if the tree is not on our list, then there's no protection for it, Councillor Vincent. Simply put.
Thank you. And a tree is different from, if you like, what's coming regarding Indigenous biodiversity, bush-related areas, larger areas. Is it going to be a completely separate provisions from individual itemised trees? Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Are we at the end of questions?
I just have one.
A little question.
Just come up
Thank you.
in listening to this conversation. So with trees that are like in the forest in Brynderwen, they would be protected by being part of that forest, is that right? Because, you know, with the zoning of that being, I'm just sort of trying to think sort of, we don't want to be assessing every single beautiful tree in the district.
So
how do we protect ones that are already in a forest?
So working on an assumption that that tree is in a stand of bush that may be identified as having high ecological values, then in due course it may be identified as being an SNA mapped area, and so that area.
Yeah, but so that would be a way that they would be protected.
Yes.
This is more kind of trees.
Look, it's more along the lines of
Their own.
backyard trees,
Yep.
or trees on the side of the road. This is quite simplistic, but
Yep.
you know, it's these individual trees around the district which are notable and which have high value.
Yeah.
Simply put.
Okay.
And just to add to what Michael is saying, a lot of that land is obviously DOC land, conservation land. So they have their own, well, they look after their own trees, and you know, they're not in the habit of cutting down native trees.
And they might already be protected by QE2 or
Covenants.
conservation covenants as well, Councillor Curnow.
All right.
All right.
That's helpful.
Thank you. Are we at the end of questions?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. We're going to go to Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock for the first piece of direction from elected members. Thank you.
Yes, I'll introduce my direction by some background. So I know an arborist in Auckland who's employed to cut down trees at night to ensure that the locals don't try and protect them and obstruct their felling. And there's 1,000 trees a week being cut down. So thank you for that technical evidence that you've supplied the council. And I can't see your name on the screen, sorry, I'd thank you in person. So I support the stem cell coming down to 130 as a way of allowing the protection of more notable trees. I would support and undoubtedly support and think it's money well worth being spent, further trees to be registered and sought out as notable trees. And I also agree with the contestable fund to protect those, to help those that do have a notable tree on their property to maintain them. And I would also have misgivings and concerns about the provision whereby if there is a notable tree, that if there is a storm that for safety and protection of the public, that tree could be felled before advancing a resource consent application, because I know from experience anecdotally, and I think we all do, that developers and interested parties go to absolute illegal lengths to sabotage the integrity of a tree, whether through poisoning or, you know, just taking a chainsaw to it furtively at night. So we have to take the long view in Kaipara. That's in the Local Government Act. We know that significant and specimen trees take generations, decades to attain a height that provides urban shade or rural shade and amenity. So my feedback is to do as much as we can to make Kaipara a beautiful treed district. Thank you.
Thank you. Further direction from elected members here. Councillor Withy, thank you.
Yes, I think I certainly support the reduced reduction to 130 as a way forward. I think we need to look a little bit beyond the existing operative district plan in terms of the trees that are in that. I certainly believe we can utilise some of the experts in the district to help identify suitable trees that can be added to the list. So yeah, I'm supportive of that sort of thing.
Thank you. Councillor Curnow.
Yeah, I generally agree with the provisions, and I do agree with the safety one, and I have a personal example of that over the weekend during the storm. A huge big maple tree in my daughter's garden blew down and is currently leaning on her power line, and the Hamilton Power Company have 700 of such cases ahead of them.
Wow.
And currently she doesn't know whether her power is going to flick off, set a fire or whatever because of that tree. It kind of needs to come down. It's a safety issue. I don't know whether it's a notable tree, but it is certainly a very big and beautiful tree, or was. So I agree with the provisions. I do agree with other trees being included, but I think in order to be the most sort of efficient, and I always like to ask the community to be part of these processes, that to redo that process of public submissions for what trees can be there, and inviting people like Gordon and anyone to nominate a tree. And I think that will give us a bit of sort of self-selection, sort of monitoring. And I do support the reduction to 130. I think possibly being at 150 is excluding trees that ought to be in. And I've also commented about that trees that are in big forests, maybe they're protected in other ways, but yeah, just if we can be confident that they are protected in other ways, then we don't need to have them included.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I also support the provisions, thank you. And I also support the reduction to the 130 for the STEM evaluation. I think it's obvious that we're possibly missing, because of such a high score rating, we're missing a few notable trees. I'm in two minds about whether the staff should be going out to seek the trees or whether we should be doing a consultation. I'm leaning more towards the public advising us. I feel, I mean, bless the staff, but I feel it's probably looking for a needle in a haystack to go out into the wider district and try and locate these things. I think the public advising us probably makes a lot more sense, as long as we are doing our best to actually engage with the public and make sure that that's the information we're looking for. I'd just hate to miss anything. So I think this is such an important part of today's work that I think, yeah, we need to make sure that somehow we actually do engage, because we know it's difficult to get the public to engage with us sometimes, and we just somehow need to click that over in their mind that please tell us, what do you want included so that we can protect such a vital asset?
My team's working with the communications and engagement team right now on our comms and engagement plan, which we'll bring back to you at the April briefing. And there'll be a whole raft of ways which we intend to engage with the community, from targeted individual engagement to wider engagement. So we'll come back in April with that. That's okay?
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Larson.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of echo your sentiments there, in that there's a district plan for the people of the district, and it's about how they can use and can't use their land. And so we're going to have plenty of opportunity for people to say what they do and don't want through the draft consultation and through submissions through the proposed plan. So I kind of feel similar to what Councillor Vincent said earlier with the buildings, is it's people bring their ideas to us and we can test those ideas, and if we agree with them and they're robust and they can go in, and that'll flush it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vincent.
With great trepidation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a couple of ideas. Let's see. I'm not happy with reducing the threshold from a score of 150 to 120, 130. However, it may be we can take a two-step approach where trees that reach the score of 150 are protected as they stand, and trees which reach 130 or even 120 are included in the plan for information purposes, which becomes relevant when someone makes application for some form of a resource consent, so that provision is made through that process to have it formally protected or taken into account when a development is undertaken. So that's just a thought off the top of my head. I think possibly back around about 2010 or maybe earlier, there was a plan change proposed, which was specifically to protect the Pahutakawa trees around the fringes of the Mangawhai harbour. And it was withdrawn because it attracted so much controversy, and there were threats to cut down these trees before they became part of the plan. So I'd be very reluctant to just bowl in and make an assessment without an invitation from the landowner. And I think that we will have enough controversy as it is to invite members of the public to suggest trees for inclusion. But I would prefer that than having an independent person going out and around the community, and because it is a very sensitive issue, as it is seen as some as a intrusion of their property rights. You know, from my perspective, I just would like people to love their trees, and public to really cherish and value them, and that's part of a positive message that I'd like to put forward, and talk about the benefits of having those trees. And if it even meant that there were additional development opportunities for people in association with taking steps to particularly care for or enhance, perhaps provide some complementary planting or whatever for those significant trees, then you know, that's what I would prefer to see happen, rather than just that big old hammer of the district plan coming down and whacking someone over the head, or waiting poised to hit someone over the head because they happen to have some wonderful trees on their property. That's my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vincent. Are there further statements here? Councillor Wills? Councillor De La Varas Woodcock, do you have a second statement for direction?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to pick up from Councillor Curno's point, because she was contrary to mine. And
it doesn't.
yeah, but anyway, just let me finish. So I think if there is to be the ability to fell storm damaged notable trees without the resource consent, then there needs to be the possibility written in, not that it would always happen, but for an investigation to take place to whether that tree was deliberately sabotaged, because we don't want loopholes for the destruction of native trees. And I think that Councillor Vincent, I'd like to push back about that we are in a new era here, and you know, the old story just doesn't work anymore, because we've got a biodiversity crisis. Trees are public good, even on private land. That's my position. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Some further direction from me. Councillor Wills, would you like to provide direction? Yeah.
No, I mean, I support the protection of trees, but after having listened to De La Varas Woodcock's comments previously that was slanderous in nature, I'll just keep my comments to myself at the moment.
Okay, you're welcome to provide direction, but it's up to you.
But no, I support the protection of trees. My only concern was it appeared focused towards exotic trees, and I'm sure there'll be a number of culturally sensitive individual trees that could be included in this. And I do appreciate the business is largely urban based as opposed to the SNA process of the collective trees. So, but I'm hoping that there'll be some that are identified and put in there that are missing at this stage.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful direction. Thank you. Some direction from me. I do support the standard tree evaluation method for us going to 130 for us going to, and on page 18 of the presentation provided here, you mentioned about feedback from open days may provide additional trees to be considered I would like us to be really proactive in this space along the lines of the conversation we've had around this table. And I'd say possibly more proactive than the April moment that you're talking about, Michael, in actually saying, well, what can we do now in February, March, while the community is waiting for Omicron, about people considering these trees so that there is a catch moment, so that that information is actually brought into the draft, which then goes back so the community is seeing that reflection. So, for example, that Councillor Wills's comments, which are perfectly valid, and that was something that I noted as well, was, wow, look at all these oak trees, nothing else, right? That by the time our draft goes out, that no one in the community says that they go, yes, there's this range of trees, as well there should be, which reflect all sorts of bits of meaning in our community. And rather than waiting into that process, but to actually go out proactively.
Thank you, Worship. And I think I'll take up Councillor Withy's offer to reach out to Gordon Hoskins. I believe he may have formed the Project Crimson Trust as well, so he'll be a good resource to work with. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. But this is certainly very important work. Right, so elected members, I think we're at the end of this item for now. Thank you. And Michael, is there anything further you need from us on notable trees?
Not on this item, thank you, Your Worship.
All right, thank you, Betty. Thank you, John. Thank you, Carl, if you're all still there. Thank you. And we'll, at this point, we shall adjourn for a 10-minute refreshment break. We will resume at 20 to 12, 11:40. Thank you. Ka kite anu.
Not bad timing, we're pretty
Kia ora koutou. So we're back into our district plan review briefing and we're proceeding with the sites and areas of significance to Māori aspect here. Item number 4 for today, being presented here by Michael with Virginia Smith. Kia ora, Virginia.
Kia ora.
And I'll assist. So her paper, so your paper, Virginia, is taken as read. So if you can speak the elected members through your PowerPoint, thank you.
Okay, thank you. If we want to go to the next slide, please, Catherine. I'm just going to give you an overview. So, as my report states, the reason why we're doing the sites and areas of significance to Māori is because it's a matter of national importance. We're taking into account sections 6E and F, and section 7 and section 8, which is our Treaty of Waitangi and other matters. So the operative district plan currently only has 30 sites listed in that, but through the review process, we've come down to only 8 should be listed in our district plan. This is because the current ones have been doubled up. So we've got the same sites registered as under their deeds, as well as their statutory acknowledgements. So if we remove those, as well as 14 sites don't actually belong to our district, they actually belong to the Far North District Council. So we've actually realistically only got 8 in our current operative district plan. This was down to our current operative district plan does not have the criteria to assess significant sites and areas for Māori at the time that it was made operative. And so that's the only reason why we were able to include the treaty settlement areas and sites at that time. So that's why we've got really small numbers in our operative district plan. And through this process, that's what we're attempting to remedy. So we've now got criteria and we've been putting that out. And so that's where mana whenua have been involved. Council have gone down to, staff have gone down to marae level and produced a document that states the criteria and allows them opportunity to put these sites forward for assessment and potential scheduling in the new district plan. So this picture here, so what we've been working off currently has been the New Zealand Archaeological Association sites. This is just a snapshot of those sites that are registered under the NZAA list. So as you can see, there is quite a few. Just from this list alone, we have over 2013 archaeological records. And of that, pre-1900, 1,663 are Māori sites. So we've been working through those sites with mana whenua partners just to determine which sites are of significance, because again, it has to be assessed. Those sites still have to be assessed against the criteria to make it into the schedule. And I just wanted to note there, as you see in that last point down below, that not all sites and areas of significance to Māori are NZAA sites. So we've got things like marae are significant areas, and mahinga kai are significant areas also for Māori. So they afford the protection if they meet that criteria. Again, if they meet the criteria, then they would be scheduled, proposed for scheduling. So yeah, next slide, please. Nice, short and sweet.
Any questions so far from elected members?
Oh, any questions? Yeah, sorry.
Councillor Wethy.
Yes, hi Virginia, you've given us a snapshot there. I presume you're spreading this the same focus across the rest of the district, because obviously this is just basically the peninsula. This is just an example, I presume, and you will be treating the rest of the district in a like manner?
Yes.
Councillor Wethy, this is an example of the archaeological sites in the Putu Peninsula only. But it's just an example.
But you will be putting that lens across, the same lens across the whole district?
Yeah, I just took the snapshot just to give you an idea of the amount of work that our team is doing at the moment and mana whenua are doing at the moment with us. This is just, as Michael said, Poto, and across the way there. We are just, again, as I said, we've got 2013 just NZAA sites recorded for pre-1900 Māori. So this is pre-1900. They've used that as almost like a, before we got into full European interaction. So, and the pre-1900 comes from the regional plan, their criteria as well. So that's why we've used the pre-1900s.
So I have a question here, and it's linked with the map. I love a good map. We've got, I see Kyle Middleton is on the screen here with all his wonderful GIS tools. Considering where we're at with the calendar and the requests that you've gone out to the Māori community on, do you have any draft of what the sites and areas of significance to Māori are? If you were to, here's the whole district and here's everything that's kind of just all the blobs.
No additional sites have been put forward to date from mana whenua partners.
Okay, thank you.
Short and sharp answer there. And the key point that Virginia has made, and I'll re-emphasise, is that if mana whenua, tangata whenua do not put forward their sites and they do not go into the schedule in a new district plan, they will not be afforded the protection through the district plan.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So our mana whenua partners are aware of that?
They are working with us at the moment.
Yeah, thank you.
Protection under other legislation, wouldn't they?
NZAA have, yeah, correct, Councillor Vincent. NZAA have their own. So you've also too got the accidental discovery protocols underneath Heritage New Zealand. So, yeah. Can we go to the next slide if there's no more questions? Okay, so the other problem with our current district plan is that because there was no criteria and it was quite a vague space, what we're trying to attempt to do with this district plan is provide clarity, consistency, and certainty for all plan users. So the provisions seek to manage any adverse effects with any identified sites. As you can see, this one here is a photo of the past site up at Waikara. We didn't give the consent. This is stuck in the 80s. I just want to clarify that we did not give the consent. Yes, but it was consented back in the 80s for Ministry of Works quarry, and so that's why it's in the state that it is in the left-hand side now. The right-hand shows the most recent picture of what's left of it. So as you can see, earthworks and disturbance activities are the key ones that have always come from mana whenua, and all of our and all of the kōrero that we've had with them from the first engagements that I had with them back in 2019. It's always been a concern that the district plan has lacked identification and clarity around consultation. So it became really apparent actually when we were doing the spatial planning consultations, things like that. So this, the provisions and the rules and things that we've tried to do with this chapter is provide clarity and enable that consultation and support the Treaty of Waitangi principles. So that's what we've been trying to do in here. So yeah, questions? No? We'll move on.
Question from Councillor Wilson Collins.
Thank you.
And then Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock.
Thank you, Virginia. I just wanted to, I might not have caught it. You said in your introduction that not all NZAA sites will be added to the list. Why is that again?
Because the criteria that we have for scheduling sites into our district plan, they have actually been developed from the regional plan. So again, we're following our hierarchy in accordance with the RMA directives. Also, it provides that clarity for landowners and affected landowners that not just any sites are being thrown up just because they're under the NZAA, because they're already provided with their own protection levels, but also it can stifle development and use of land. Sorry, it can, for instance, there are for instance, there's some activities such as grazing. If we put every single midden, that can handle grazing, but we had a generic ruling saying that anything under the NZAA you can't, or anything under our scheduling you can't touch or anything like that. So that's really restrictive. And again, there has to be the story that goes to that midden to make that's sort of the level of criteria that we've asked Māori to provide. It has to be, it has to hit a certain level of criteria there. Why is that midden significant? Does it play into like a bigger PAR site and a bigger area? Do you know what I mean? So that's why we aren't putting every single NZAA site in.
So just a quick point, Jins, just from a consenting perspective, if we were to protect every single NZAA site that Jins has mentioned this morning, the 2013 sites would be triggering consents all over the district with a lot of frustrated landowners. So the point of this exercise is really to focus on those sites of significance to Māori, and as Virginia just indicated, some of those might include several of the NZAA sites, and it might also just include, for instance, a PAR site or a very limited numbers, but it does come back to that criteria. So just bear that in mind, many landowners. So that's why we're keeping it narrow. And don't forget that those NZAA sites require their own process through the Heritage New Zealand legislation anyway, in terms of damage, modification or destruction, in terms of an authority from the Historic Places Trust.
Yeah, thank you. No, the reason for my question was that it wasn't that I thought they should all be included, but I just didn't know why some were and some weren't. Whereas with the buildings, it was, well, they're already covered by something, so we're not including them. So that clears that up. This might be a stupid question, but there are no stupid questions. And does the district plan, like if someone is looking up a property on the district plan, would it still have a note that it's covered by, does it cover these other, so it might not be scheduled, but actually it's got an NZAA notification or anything included in it?
It's not
Is it
normal.
like a limb report?
It's not.
No, by the district plan. So no on the district plan, no. But as Catherine's touched on, if someone gets a limb report or something like that, then that will bring up all the applicable underlying things outside of a district plan as well, but not in the district plan, no.
Yeah, okay. I just didn't have that fancy map that we were looking at, where you can click on a property and it tells you all the chapters of the district plan.
It does all the district plan related provisions and chapters.
Yeah.
That can't refer to other legislation outside of our control as well.
Yeah, cool. Just thank you.
Thank you. Councillor De La Barris Woodcock.
Yes, so thank you, Virginia, for your report. I'm just wondering about the sites and the boundaries, because I am aware of an instance where a urupā with statues on it in Potor, there is a building consent allowed that sort of devalues to somewhat the visual amenity of the urupā on the skyline. And so there's where cadastral boundaries separate archaeological sites or sites of significance. Are they, is there any ability to make provisions to allow a more fulsome protection of the site itself so that you have integrity of it visually?
Yep. So through my research, cadastral boundaries are determined by, it's been done in case law. It hasn't been set in stone by any any legislation that I've seen around a cadastral boundary around any site or area of significance. It's come through case law and through cases. Most of the judges have pointed to the cadastral boundary being determined under Part 2 of the RMA. The cadastral boundary is determined by how it's achieving the purpose of the RMA, and so I'm not comfortable putting a certain boundary, a definite boundary, because of that litigation side of things for council. And this is why we've really pushed for consultation with Māori through the provisions and the rules, is so that together, hopefully, the plan is hopefully together through this consultation, they can determine themselves. And it takes that litigation, it takes that adversarial position away, if it makes sense to the councillors.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
If I could answer something as well, Virginia. So this chapter is sites and areas of significance to Māori, and it may well be that mana whenua, tangata whenua put forward individual sites, or they may suggest that an area is so culturally significant that it's a cultural landscape, and so an area may include, for example, 10, 20, 30 mid-ins, Urapa, etc. And so mana whenua may put forward that this area is a cultural landscape. So just touching on Councillor Alvaras Woodcock's questioning on the Urapa, and Urapa may be in a cultural landscape. Yeah. Just an area of.
Right. So if in the operative district plan they had consulted with Māori about their cultural sites of significance, that unsympathetic building may not have been consented in its form. Yeah, you don't need to answer that. I guess I'm saying.
Answer that, yeah.
Yeah, is that this
was consulted and they approved it.
Yes, but Councillor Wills, there hadn't been such a thing of the concept of cultural landscape in these sites. So this is something different, and it's times have changed. So yeah, kia ora.
Would you please lower your hand, Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock? Thank you, Councillor Kerner.
I'm just interested in how the consultation is going, because it sounds quite onerous. The thousands of sites to be considered and thought through and evaluated. So can you talk a little bit about that, maybe?
It really is. It's really time consuming, but it's rewarding too at the same time. It's rewarding. I didn't realise how rich we are in cultural heritage in Kaipara. I knew we had a big one, but I didn't realise how much. But we're working closely with our mana whenua partners, Te Reo and Te Roroa, and we're working through that. So it's a slow, but we have to be meticulous. We have to.
Yeah.
Virginia has reached out to every single marae in our district to date. Wow. And so we're really going through the process with them. But I'd like to re-emphasise it is up to our mana whenua partners to put their sites forward.
Yeah, that was my, sorry, can I?
Yep, sorry. Councillor Wills.
Yeah, that was my question. It was acknowledged that it was actually less areas identified at this stage than the operative plan. The additional areas, which I've got no problem with, but why are they being put into this district plan process? Was it just to give them an opportunity to assess whether they were sufficiently warranting to go in the district plan? I'm just asking, we've just had the discussion, it's like, it's only in the 10s or 20s, sorry, I don't know, it's in the 10s or 20s, likely to be, but we've got 2,000 or 1,600 locations acknowledged in this, but that's not part of the district plan. Can I just ask how that ties in with this, please?
So what it is that mana whenua, because as we all know, they've got very limited capacity. So what they did ask us was that we could go through the NZAA sites and prioritise the wahitapu, and which is the archaeological sites that still have koiwi in them, and or bones, remains, and the pa sites. So that's what we've been doing for them, getting those all together for them, and so that what's happening is the next part of the process is I'll be going to meet with them, we'll be sitting down and we'll be matching their historical records with the physical archaeological data that we've collected, so that they have all of the information that they need to put these sites up without, because one of the things that we were really aware of when we did the criteria was, were we setting up Māori to fail? Could they meet the criteria? Did they have enough information to meet the criteria to have their sites of significance put forward and scheduled and protected underneath the district plan? So we've been helping them in that sort of form, as Michael has said, that we are here as partners. Again, it's for them to put their sites up. That's their rangatiratanga. It is not ours, but we are here to awhi them as our treaty partners. So that's why those sites are relevant, Councillor Wills.
I wasn't challenging their relevance, I was just asking their relevance to the district plan.
Because some of those sites are going to,
even if we identify those areas, they still, as has been said, they still have to move up to mana whenua, actually putting them forward to meet the criteria to go in the district plan. So if you like, we're doing so two side by side projects simultaneously.
Yes. Their one is more, they've gone focused more on their historical ones that they've got through the claims. They've their mahinga their maraes, because we didn't want another situation like Kapihu, so they're all over in that cultural space at the moment, and so that's why we've taken on sort of like the physical things that we can on through the NZAA sites. But I do understand what you're saying, Councillor Wills, but it will come together and make sense, hopefully. No, it will. I promise it will.
If it doesn't make sense, we're not at the end. Yeah. So
yeah, we're not at the end yet. Yeah, but it will come together. And as Michael said, it's a jigsaw puzzle, and we're just piecing it all together. The difference is that we're piecing it together with mana whenua.
Just one point to note, Your Worship, is that our criteria that we are using is based on the methodology that the Regional Council has used in the regional plan for Northland to identify the sites and areas of significance to Māori in coastal and freshwater bodies, including wetlands. And so it's been tested through the regional plan. So our approach is based on their methodology as well.
Thank you. Thank you. So just a quick question from me. So based on everything you're saying, are we on track for the calendar regarding the feedback in time from our mana whenua partners to meet the deadlines that we're working to here?
Yes. At this point, we are, yes.
Wonderful. That's the very good news. Thank you. Councillor Vincent, question for clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, actually, I have to go very shortly, but I did want to take issue with something that Victoria said in regarding us, KDC, as being treaty partners. I believe it's the Crown which is the treaty partner with the tangata whenua, and we are regularly thrust into the role of acting on behalf of the Crown in our dealings. And so with that proviso, I would have liked to see in the perfect world, including me sitting around the table there with you other people in Dargaville, that there would have been representatives from the tangata whenua sitting with us and dealing with not just this issue, but everything that was on the card today. And that would, to me, would imbue much more the spirit of partnership. That's what I wanted to say, but I have to go now. Sorry. I wish you a good day.
Thank you.
Good luck with the operation.
Thank you. I'll see to it.
Yeah. I hope they get removed well. Yeah, thank you.
I should make it clear that's
Show and
that's
tell.
my wife's cataract is not anything else.
All right, thank you. So, thank you. So, Michael, you're not seeking direction from elected members on this subject?
If we could go to the last slide, please, Catherine.
Yeah,
You are?
yeah.
There we go. Yep.
Just waiting for.
You're just asking
So,
if,
yes.
if we're going in the right direction and
Yeah.
are there any concerns? But that's the extent of it. And I'd just say from my perspective, if Mana Whenua is happy with the process that they're working through, then that's good. And the feedback that we've got from Virginia is that they're on track and we're confident.
That's right.
Then that's the best that it can be for now, knowing that we've also done the spatial plan work and that's helpful and so on.
That's right. And at an operational level, we are working quite closely with Mana Whenua. We have a Mana Whenua quarterly hui, which we meet with them every 4 months. Another point to make is that whilst it's hopefully ideal that they do put some sites forward for the draft, that's not fatal. It's actually the notification date is when they need their sites put forward by. Great if they can at the draft stage, but the cutoff point is the notification date.
Thank you.
And they know that as well.
Thank you. That's clear. So, elected members, page 23 here of the presentation. Is there further directional concerns with the provisions as they're coming through at this point?
I'm happy with that.
Yeah, the only concern I had was around the load of work that we're asking Mana Whenua partners to undertake with us. And I'm sure that that is in hand and that is definitely. Yeah, so I know that there's a lot of other stuff that I know that there's Mana Whenua partners to be involved with, and this seems quite large, but I'm assured that it's in hand. So.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to commend the team on the work that they are doing. And Virginia, thank you for your presentation. And I just think the comment has been made today that times have changed, and you sure as showed us that with that photo of the resource consent that was given out for that past site. And I just think that it's really great to see everything we've covered this morning. And the fact that we're now taking these places of significance seriously and doing our best and working with Mana Whenua to get the best results and preserve these places. And I just feel a little bit of hope for the future that times really are changing. Thanks.
Thank you. Right. So, Michael, back to you. I'm not seeing further feedback.
Thank you, Your Worship. If there's no further direction on this topic, then we'll move to the noise.
Wonderful.
Section.
Let's make some noise.
Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you, Virginia. Ka kite.
Over to you, Catherine.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. I've just messaged my noise expert, John Stiles, who is joining us for this part of the presentation, as we were obviously running a little bit behind, but he should be here soon. So I'll continue until he arrives, and when he does, I'll introduce him as part of this work. So let's make some noise. Noise is an interesting topic in the district plan review, and a lot of people sort of think, oh, it's not a major, but it really is a major when it comes to landing in court and having debates about where certain activities should happen, and noise modelling and noise contours and all those types of arguments. So it's one of the provisions that I think is probably most valuable in our district plan as far as protecting amenity values and also ensuring reverse sensitivity effects. So in the first slide here, I've just made some comments around where it sort of fits into the Resource Management Act. So Sections 16 and 17 are where any unreasonable noise comes about, and obviously we need to make sure that we're protecting amenity through district plan provisions. So you'll see in the package of material that's what I'm trying to do through a range of activities and zones. So John from Styles Group has been working with us on an issues and options report, which is about 80 something pages long. So we haven't shared that with you, but that is informing a lot of what's going into these draft rules, and there's still a lot of work to go. Noise provisions are quite technical, and I'll profess that I don't know everything about noise, which is why John's on board to help us. And yeah, I guess the key focus for this district plan is to manage reverse sensitivity effects on noise sensitive activities and environments. So some good examples of that is when we've got heavy industry or commercial activities right next to residential, we want to make sure that those activities are protected. And certainly in the rural zone, you come up against all sorts of issues out there with activities that need to happen in those environments, but obviously the encroachment of new residential activities, which are noise sensitive activities. I can just see John's jumped on now, so I might take this opportunity to introduce him in a second. Good morning, John.
Good morning. That appeared to be perfect timing.
Perfect timing, yeah, thank you. I'm just going to take a quick opportunity to introduce you to our council and elected members. So through you, Your Worship, this is John Styles from Styles Group, and John's got a range of experience across the country in noise, and I've worked with John probably since the Whangarei days, so over 15 years we've known each other. And so John's got an amazing amount of skill and experience in the environment court space, managing different appeals on different district councils, and I believe you're in court at the moment with Whangarei on some issues with NZTA, which we'll talk a little bit about today. So yeah, so John, I'm just in the introductory stage at the moment, so if you just hang back there, we'll bring you in soon. So back to the slide. The national planning standards, which John was also involved in, provide us some good national direction in terms of New Zealand standards for noise, which is very helpful. And I think what we're trying to achieve in this review is not just necessarily referring to those standards, but actually capturing the essence of what those standards are about and putting them into the district plan rules, which does make it a little bit more lengthy, but the thing is we don't want people to have to go out and pay a whole bunch of money to get a standard when we could be really clear on that in our rule and make it easy for them to comply with as a permitted activity. So we're doing some work to try and make the plan as usable as possible in that space. Like I mentioned, there's still a lot we need to think about in terms of specific provisions. So today we'll probably touch on some of those details. There are a couple of sites that I do want to mention which have not made it into the rules yet for deliberate reason, and that's the Fonterra dairy factory site in Mangataroto, which has a noise boundary at the moment, and we'll probably do some work with them. My understanding is that they want some changes potentially, so we need to get in touch with them and see what changes they're wanting. But at the moment, the plan is to keep things fairly consistent with the operative district plan, which has some provisions for them. And there are some other activities, as you'll be aware, the Silverfern Farms site, which is a heavy industry site. We're probably mostly addressing that through zoning in the new district plan. And then the other issue that I think is really worth mentioning, which John is doing some work on at the moment, is that the New Zealand Transport Agency, or Waka Kotahi, do like to see setbacks where state highways are concerned. And we haven't put any provisions into the draft that you've got today, but we do need to have a conversation with Waka Kotahi around what they would be wanting to do and providing some evidence around that, because they are submitting on all district plans across the country, requiring 100-metre setbacks in some cases, where it's 100-kilometre speed limit, or a 40 or 50k setback within residential environments, which would affect a number of our townships in Kaipara. So think about Kaiwaka, Mangataroto, Paparoa, Ruai and Dargaville all have a state highway running through the middle. So we aren't jumping to any conclusions there yet, but what that would mean based on what Waka Kotahi is submitting on plans is that we would need to require those properties to acoustically insulate if they're within those setbacks. And that obviously has a huge cost to those landowners. So we're not wanting to just jump in their boots and all. We want to have a discussion with Waka Kotahi and see if there's a way that we can address that issue. And John might want to talk some more about that if councillors have some specific concerns or queries. So jumping forward to the next slide there, I'm not going to take you through all of the material that I've circulated because it's quite lengthy, but I do want to just point out that we've tried really hard to think about the types of activities we really need to focus on for kaipara. So you'll see that I've got some specific exemptions for the noise standard S1, which is the key set of standards that apply across the zones. And I've got a table coming up with a comparison between the operative provisions and where we're sitting in terms of going forward. And there are some slight differentiations which John can talk to, but all in all, those are quite minor changes, but it just gives a little bit more flexibility in some of those environments. So some of the activities that are more specific, we've focused on some temporary events, so things like festivals and concerts. We definitely want to have some controls around those types of activities. Temporary military training activities, which we possibly don't see a whole lot of, but it's good to have those provisions in the plan. Construction noise, which also considers the effects of vibration. That's a really key one, particularly if you've got a lot of new development happening across the district. And helicopter landing areas, and this is one that John and I have had quite a bit of discussion about, because this can cause some issues with some areas, and thinking about kaipara over the next 10 years, we may find that there becomes a little bit more of an issue with private landowners actually being able to fly helicopters from their private properties to places of work or other destinations, and that can be quite problematic for the residents that live around that. And we've seen a few examples of that across the country, which has ended up in court and not a very good place to land. So we want to front foot that issue in our district plan. Bird scaring devices is a great example of rural activities, especially where we've got horticultural operations and noisy devices happening in the small wee hours of the morning, upsetting neighbours, and that's the same with frost fans and horticultural wind machines. So there's quite a lot of direction across the country on those types of activities now, so we're trying to incorporate that into these rules. And then I've mentioned the noise sensitive activities in the light and heavy industrial zones, but of course those are the ones that we want to manage the effects on those noise sensitive environments, and then commercial activities as well, particularly where you've got second story residential dwellings which might require acoustic insulation. And we're also restricting activities like blasting, shooting, and gunfire and wind turbines, which obviously is quite key when we think about the future of kaipara. We might see ourselves subject to a few more wind turbine applications, and noise is always a key consideration in those resource consents. So I'm just going to pause there for a sec, because I realise that's a lot of content for elected members to take on, but do you have any specific questions at this point? No. Shall I carry on?
Carry on, please, Catherine, carry on. Yep.
All right, so the next slide, which I won't spend too much time on, but it was really just to give elected members a sense of the fact that we are looking at what's provided for in our plan currently, and bearing in mind obviously that we're going to have some new zones pop up in this district plan review. So we've been looking at how best to fit those in terms of noise provisions, and basically we're trying to be as consistent as we can, and there will be some changes obviously where we're needing to think about things like the open space or sports and active recreation zones. So we have put some placeholders in around those at the moment, and also the airport special purpose zone which Betty's working on at the moment, and we will put some guidance in there in the draft, but that's an area that we haven't completely got our head around yet. So I don't know, John, is it worth just having a quick mention of the differentiation between these standards and how we're not doing anything drastic, but you might want to just explain what LAEQ means and LAF max if that's helpful to elected members.
Sure thing. So these zone provisions that we're looking at now are very similar to what's in the operative plan. We need to update some of the technical noise level descriptors, so the LAEQ and LAF max in some instances to be consistent with the National Planning Standard. But generally speaking, there's not much of a change here from the operative plan. LAEQ that you see there in most of the noise limits, that's the average noise level over a given period of time. And you'll see at night there very commonly in the nighttime period an LAF max noise limit applying. So that's very simply the maximum noise level in any very short fraction of a second period of time during the night. So that might be from a car door slam or a truck going up a driveway or some other relatively short-term noise. These are the descriptors that are mandated by the Noise and Vibration Metrics Planning Standard and are very common around the country, and they will control all of the noise sources in these zones very well.
Perfect, thanks, John. So I'm going to jump ahead unless there's questions from elected members on there, but in the essence of time, because I realise we want to try and stay on track today. But yeah, I'm just seeking some direction really as to whether
I've got a question at this point, Councillor Curnow.
Yeah, just a question around the change from the 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. and you've gone from the 40 decibel average to 70 decibel max. Is there a limit on how many times you can hit that max? Because, you know, you might, I can't imagine what sort of activity, but without there being an average, it seems it's not being smoothed. You could sort of, you could be up around 69 all night long. So I'm just wondering where we're at with that. I know I'm dropping deep down into the weeds, but.
No, look, you've actually got a very keen eye. And I think that's actually an inconsistency in the tables, and they should read the same from the operative to the proposed. So there is no intention to remove that 40 decibel LAEQ limit. That should be in both columns at night time.
Right, okay, that makes me happy, thank you.
Well spotted.
Well spotted.
Well spotted.
I like my sleep.
Thank you. Go back to sleep, Councillor Curnow. Your work is done. Councillor Wethy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it's many moons since I was carting a noise meter around taking readings, and so I'm probably stretching on my memory here a wee bit. What I guess comment I'd like to have on some of your tables here, for example, under your standards that you've got listed here for basically medium density residential, low density residential, this is under standards noise S1. You've got the maximum noise level in a specific area, and this is actually a maximum over a 15-minute period between daylight hours, 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. of 50 dB. And I'm just wondering, you know, most of the, certainly in the area I live in, most of the lawnmowers will exceed that. No one has a lawn that only takes 15 minutes to mow. So what I'm really saying is, here's one example. Are we sure that we're not making a rob for our back? We know that we're already under criticism in a lot of areas within the district because we don't have enough monitoring of the existing noise levels. But if we put things in that are pretty tight, we're just going to get more and more requests for policing noise limits, which we can't resource. So I'm just a bit query about that, because that's one example. And if you go down a little bit further in your, and this is in all zones noise, there's 6, construction noise. Well, I'm not worried too much about the construction noise, but we have a lot of people doing landscaping work. And if you've ever been in a residential property and someone brings in a mulcher to take care of all the branches they've chopped down, and they'll go for 4 hours non-stop, and they are probably around nearer 90 rather than, 65 or 70. I'm just concerned that we don't put stuff in here which is going to be not able to be produced and will be, obviously creating a rod for our back.
Look, I can answer those if you like, Catherine. Are you happy for that?
Yeah, sure. Go for it, John.
Sure. So look, on the first point, with the residential zones, that's a very good observation. And there's two parts to the answer. The first is that the way the noise standards work in New Zealand Standard 6802, that works by setting a noise limit with LAEQ after it, and then 15 minutes, it quite often says in the subscript. That looks like a limit that applies every single 15-minute period, but in fact, it actually isn't. And when you go deep into the standard, it gets quite complex, but essentially you've got that 50 decibel limit applying as an average over the daytime period. The 15-minute notation there means that you can't have any 15-minute period over 55. And I appreciate that's not straightforward, but that's what it means. And that approach, as I say, is mandated by the National Planning Standard. So there is quite some flexibility in the way that noise limit is applied. The second point is that Catherine and I have been having some very important discussions around exemptions for those noise limits, particularly in the residential and rural zones, and wanting to make sure that things like home handyman work, mowing the lawns, children playing, all of these very common sources in the residential zones, and then harvesting, tractor movements, animals, these sort of sources in the rural zones are exempt from these noise limits. In terms of the construction, if that mulching example you talk about was done by a home handyman, that would be exempt automatically. There's no change in the actual numerical noise limits between the operative and proposed plan. We're simply proposing to bring in the table of noise limits to the proposed plan, so that a plan reader doesn't have to go and spend $112, I think it is, to buy the construction noise standard to find out what is permitted and what isn't. But again, those exemptions and the list of activities that actually comprise construction work are going to be the key in those instances, rather than the limits themselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor De La Varas Woodcock, question.
Yes, so I'm wondering about the decibel level and testing, because I'm aware of a complaint from a constituent where they were certain that their music was within the decibel range, but nevertheless received repeated noise complaints that were followed up by noise officers. And the noise officers told them that it was a subjective noise was received subjectively, by different people, and whether these provisions are more permissive or prescriptive than the operative in terms of this sort of grey area of subjectivity that noise control officers seem to have to work within.
Sure. So the answer to that question is not too straightforward. Apologies for that. But the part of the Resource Management Act that is used when in responding to parties and the like by noise control officers is fixed in the RMA, sections 326, 327 and 328, and they won't be varied at all or influenced at all by the operative or the proposed plan. Those provisions of the Act require a subjective assessment that's often informed by what's called a matrix, so like a scoring system for time of day, the annoyance of the actual noise source. You know, is it music or is it something that's not so annoying? And then finally the level. That's all assessed in subjective terms, and that won't change, and the proposed plan can have no influence on that. The proposed plan and the operative plan have noise limits in them that are designed to apply not so much to parties, in fact, not really at all to parties, but more to businesses primarily operating factories, function centres, these sorts of activities which have an ongoing noise generation component to them.
Right. So is that, so for example, early childhood centres, there being a reverse sensitivity if there's an urban, rural or mixed use zone, is that right? That sort of thing, where there's constant activity noise that's connected to that business of that activity, like a
Yes.
laundromat with washing machines going, you know, reverberating all day long.
Precisely. That's what these operative and proposed plan controls will deal with, those sorts of noise sources. Yep.
And thank you. So in terms of, say, if we go to that example of an early childhood centre with squealing toddlers and stuff, you know, that's not constant, but is the decibel limit of that testable, of intermittent vocal noises?
Yep, absolutely it is. Noise assessments for childcare centres are a very common thing. And the effects of childcare centres are interesting because they generally only operate during the day on weekdays, and typically only when schools are open. So they don't make any noise in the evenings, at night, or on the weekends, or during the holidays. But of course, they do have kids playing, stubbing their toes, etc., during the weekdays, and so that's something we're very mindful of. And Catherine and I are having discussions about exactly what noise limits should apply to early childcare centres.
Right. So my final question, do these noise provisions work in a resource consent or building consent application in tandem with design guidelines, like for buffers, vegetation buffers and noise deterrence, you know, like insulation? I'm not quite.
Yeah, most of the time they would be conditions of consent. Councillor Delavaris Woodcock, they typically, when they put in their application, they might have already done a noise assessment, so they might have engaged an expert like John to look at what their noise is likely to be and how they might mitigate those effects. Right. So they might use different methods depending on sort of who the receiving parties might be, whether it's close neighbours or if it's rural, it might not be such an issue. So yeah, it all comes into play in terms of a site-specific assessment at the time of the resource consent application, and for that reason, generally that's why we don't make daycare centres permitted activities in the plan, because they are usually the ones that cause the most disturbance as far as noise. That's the key issue with those. And traffic movement, of course.
Thank you. Can we please move on to the direction required from the elected members? Page 28, which is the next page of your slide, Catherine. Yeah. I have a question for you about the second question there. Do you support more clarity with a number of activities, for example, helicopter landing pads? What do you mean by more clarity? Do you mean what is now being provided in the proposed direction?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by more, or are
Like
you
roll
saying
them
in addition to what is already in the direction that you've got? What do you mean by more clarity?
So, apologies, Your Worship. What I meant by that was really that John and I have tried to tease out some additional activities so that they're not just relying on those zone standards. So we're trying to provide clarity with the types of activities and different things that we're trying to control, like the helicopter pads and the wind turbines, which are not specified as activities in the operative plan at the moment. They just fall under that general umbrella of noise provision. So we're trying to just tease out a few extra things for control, which might have a point of difference from our regular rules, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Okay, that's clear. So, and I would say some direction from me on that, just is certainly with the environment that we're now heading into, the clarity is helpful rather than being silent on these matters. Yeah.
Silent noise.
Yeah, silent. Yeah. So yes, because wind turbines, who would have imagined? Large scale wind turbines, but now they're becoming a thing, and they have been a problem in the past for people who may be off grid and have a wind turbine, but affecting their neighbour in a location and sense. And I know some examples that are more than 2 decades old of that. So at a household level. So getting clarity here is helpful. Thank you. Yeah. And Councillor Curnow has picked up those gaps in what was written here regarding the lower level decibel count. So I'm sure you'll be bringing those across into the prospective plan. But otherwise, I would say, from my perspective, the general direction it's headed in here is right. It's looking actually, and I would say, to be a more simple and enabling version than what we have right now. So that's really good. So we'll take that as a win. And I don't see any specific kaipara activities where noise may be an issue in the immediate horizon that are not captured with this. Yeah. So
Thank you, Your Worship.
That's from me. Is there any further contributions, direction?
Nothing to add.
Councillor Wethy.
Just one thing, I think you mentioned, Catherine, about the exemptions, and I guess that they will be subject to, a list, or that will be part of the final document, obviously. So I think that's important that we get those clearly out there so people don't end up making a nuisance to council noise on something that's already been exempt under our district.
Thank you. Before we, Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock has a contribution here.
Yes, I support more clarity on helicopter landing pads in particular because of the known problems that are happening on Waiheke with helicopters disturbing the peace left, right and centre. So we need to make sure that doesn't happen if Kaipara ever becomes an exclusive resort type area for the elite. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you, Councillor.
An interesting digital piece there. Thank you. Thank you. So I think that's the end of the direction from the elected members. But before we conclude this item, Catherine and John, can we just go back to the point you were making about Wakakotahi and the state highway noise provisions? Could you just provide us with more information about that? Because
Yes,
you just glanced over that and I'm like going,
wait, what?
Goodness me, what on earth is that? So could you just provide more clarity on that, please?
Absolutely, Your Worship. So without preempting our process, we already know, and having been in a process at Waikato it's known across New Zealand that waka kotahi are wanting to implement, and John can speak more to this as well, he knows a lot more detail, but waka kotahi do have maps in place already which are publicly accessible. They are looking to impose restrictions on their state highways. Now, whether we agree with that or not, which at the moment I haven't put any provisions in the plan because I think it's worth a conversation with them first. We'd want to be really clear and have evidence from waka kotahi as to why and how those areas would work, because what we have seen in other parts of the country, and some district plans have accepted their submissions and included these setbacks that I mentioned. So I mentioned 100-metre setback in rural environments with 100-kilometre speed limits, and also a 50-metre or 40-metre setback from state highway boundaries for acoustic insulation to happen if anyone decides to create additions or alterations to their buildings. Now that involves a lot of cost for those people that fall into those setbacks. So for that reason alone, I'm erring with some caution, but I think it warranted mentioning to elected members today that we can anticipate a submission from them to this effect. So John, do you want to just maybe talk about your experiences? And obviously there's information that's confidential around the court case happening in Whangarei at the moment, but just provide a bit more context to the specifics around what waka kotahi are wanting and how that could work in our plan if we do go down that track.
Sure. So just by way of background, I'm involved in plan reviews and Environment Court appeals on this very issue in Waikato, Whangarei, Selwyn, Porirua, Tauranga, Christchurch. I think that's all. There might be one or two others. Napier. I'm very, very familiar with the issues. The essence of the controls is that next to state highway and railways, it is or can be quite noisy. And those noise effects can be so great on some of the busier parts of the networks that adverse health effects can arise, particularly if there are sleep disturbance problems. And the controls aim to require people building new houses or altering their existing ones by creating new rooms over a certain size to acoustically insulate those rooms and those spaces, to ensure that they can essentially have the windows closed and very importantly at night, so that they can get a good night's sleep. The issue that we're running into with the transport authorities, and that's Kiwirail and Waka Kotahi, is that they are commonly seeking to roll out a very blanket approach, which includes these 100-metre setbacks everywhere and similar setbacks for rail. And they have been challenged in many cases on the basis that in some parts of the district, the traffic flows might be so low as to not actually generate any issue to warrant controls. And in particular for rail, if there's only freight movements during the day and there might only be a handful, there's simply not enough effect to justify these controls and require landowners to go through a consent process and to do the measurements and assessment to demonstrate that there's no problem to deal with. So I think Catherine's right. It is something that needs to be treated with a lot of care, because we're very wary of having very inefficient and expensive and unnecessary controls in the plan, and we don't want to be cracking a nut with a sledgehammer in these cases. So I think it is something that needs to be traversed very carefully.
And through your worship, we do have the maps. I don't know if Kyle's got them to hand, but we have been looking at the waka kotahi maps if elected members want to see what they look like. Waka kotahi have actually mapped the setbacks into environments, and Kaiwaka is a great example actually, which we were looking at yesterday. So if you do want to see that, I'm quite sure Kyle can assist me to to pull those up from the Waka Kotahi website, and we are pulling that data into our district plan, so we've got it there and available should we need it. But I think the first step from my perspective would be to have a meeting with them and front foot this before the draft goes out to see what approach they want to take. But I'd be very nervous to put anything in before we notify without some kind of evidence. And also, to be clear, I don't believe KDC should be doing that work. So hence my reluctance to put any provisions in at the moment.
Sorry, you're saying that work insofar as the explaining to the local people? Do you mean that work? That it's Waka Kotahi's job to explain to the people that this is their decision?
Well, yeah, we need some evidence from Waka Kotahi that supports why we would need to impose these restrictions on those residents and ratepayers in our district. So yes, if we're going to put anything in the plan, it has to be evidenced. And so we believe that that's Waka Kotahi's role to do that and to show why we would need to put provisions into the plan.
Thank you. This is a very interesting additional discussion. Thank you for that extra information. I'm sure we can't get to the end of that today, but thank you for bringing us to this point. So we look forward to that further noise-related discussion. No further burning matters from the elected members regarding noise? Nothing to shout about? No? All right. Okay. Thank you. So thank you, John. Thank you, Catherine, for this. And at this point, we're going to revert to Michael Day to take us through the final item before we go to our lunch break. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So last slide here, this is the considerations from the December briefing. I'll keep this short and sharp. The team are proceeding ahead with drafting the hazardous substances and contaminated land provisions as per direction at the December briefing. Natural hazards, you'll recall that the team discussed the sort of high-level principles with you in December. We're now at the stage of preparing those draft provisions. We had a workshop last week with the technical consultants as well as our consents team. We are drafting up the objectives and policies. Further workshop later on this week for those rules. So everything is coming together. Everything will come back to you in time for the April briefing.
Thank you.
Short and sharp.
Thank you.
On track.
All right, on track. All right, very good. No issues with the on trackness? No? Great, thank you. We will conclude this morning's work at this point and go to our lunch break. Thank you. So just before I do, I'd just like to acknowledge all of the consultants who have supported us this morning. Thank you. And to the team for the work that's been done here. We as elected members will be resuming this afternoon with a public excluded workshop. So our work will continue, but for those joining us today, thank you for being able to attend so far. And as you've heard, we're right on track with our important work and it will all be coming together. The mighty jigsaw puzzle will be coming together and coming to all the people of Kaipara very, very soon. So at that point, I just thank everyone again for your attendance. Ka kite anō, and we'll close down and we'll go to lunch now. And we will resume. Can we resume team at 1:15?